Do my kids fun.
You wanna be panels?
They want, oh, your kids are doing that, I'm a little worried for you. All right. Mm. All right, thank you. I'll call meeting to order of our June 4th budget committee meeting. Roll call, Councilmember Law and I are both here, along with several staff members. Public comment, if nobody be online. Nobody's here. Go to approve the minutes for the special budget committee meeting of April 21st, 2025.
Motion to approve minutes for the special budget meeting.
Second, all those in favor? Aye.
Yes.
We'll go to 4.2, review to propose proposition for appropriations. Limit, my favorite topic in the world.
So every year we have to approve the appropriation limit. It was a legislation passed back when Prop 13 was passed by initiative by Paul Gann and oh my god, why am I forgetting that? Howard Darden, sorry, my name is slipping my mind. It was a way to limit spending, and even though the wording is appropriations, it's actually a way to limit tax revenue. So basically what you're allowed to do is take what your revenue, what your tax revenue in 78-79 was, and then adjust it for cost of living adjustments as well as population. So every year we come back and take the number that you had last year, which was about $38.9 million. You're allowed to basically give the factors that the state provides. The inflation factor was 6.44%. And then you get to choose the higher of the population change within your own city or the population change in your county. For our case, the county population was basically flat. Pleasant Hill was at negative 0.24%. So we took the county population factor. You multiply that by your prior number and you end up with the new number for fiscal year 25-26 of 41.4 million. So based on the adopted biennial budget from the previous year, we take those revenue numbers that was in the staff report, and we're under that number by about $9.3 million. The question that you might ask is, what if we actually hit 41.4 million on the off chance? The state's had that issue a couple times, and you can earmark things. For example, if you got close or if you actually went over, maybe there's a capital project you can earmark it for. That's one of the exceptions. But you really can't find a way to either use the earmark or get below the appropriations amount. In theory, you would have to find a way to refund taxes back to the taxpayers. Is the ultimate consequence is the right word, but the ultimate thing if you can't get below the appropriations limit. That's pretty much it. That's absolutely different. We're going to forward this to City Council for their approval on June 16th. Oh, for the 41.4 million and the adjustment factors for inflation and population.
Any questions?
Just a question about why it went from 38.9 to 32.1 in taxes. I think you mentioned this earlier. From FY24 to FY25.
No.
So sorry, the calculation was 38, but what was the previous year? What did we have in the previous year? I'm sorry, that's what I meant to ask. In FY24-25, what was the amount of appropriation that we had budgeted prior to that?
Don't have I don't provide, if I had to guess, it's less, probably about 31 million.
So it's pretty much relatively the same. We haven't increased the tax much more than we did from last year.
Well, again, it's based on the information, for example, just like, for example, a couple months ago, you had the presentation from HDL regarding sales tax. They also provide us, these are the biggest numbers normally that you would get. Sales tax regarding the general fund, Measure K, it also provides information regarding property tax. So the annual changes that you would see is just based on revised assumptions at that point in time.
And then there were the part where item number 2, right on the page 2, on the revenue covered under Proposition 4, there are calculation of interest proration, proceeds of tax, total revenue, X total of interest. I did see some red tick marks there. Are there comments in there that we should have
Oh.
seen?
No,
Oh.
in theory, I should, I know what those will support. Those are for me,
Oh, okay.
so that I remind myself every year to make sure I do X and Y when I do that interest calculation factor. That's just more of a comment to make sure we do it consistently every year to year.
It's not. We've never been close. County Connection, I think, was half, 100 million to 50 million or something like that.
Have you ever seen, I guess, maybe a question for you, Miro, I guess, have you ever seen us go above,
Never.
no?
Never. So it's never been even close.
No, I mean, the only times, because I've seen it in my past, is cities that they thought they're trying to be fiscally sound and they didn't adopt the factors. So they said, hey, we're just gonna leave it flat, we're under, why are we gonna change? Well, the problem is when you actually get over, what most of those cities ended up doing during the audit days was, what you can do is go back in time. So you can retroactively, as long as you can find it all, the population factors and the cost of living factors and
Go back and do it.
go back and do it like you did it. That's what a lot of cities ended up doing when they didn't realize they were hurting themselves.
Yeah,
Now the state has had to do some other things because they've done it correctly. But yeah, most of the cities, you don't really see cities that are close to the limit. And if they are, it's because it's a decision they chose to make.
yeah, I read into again too, is that like if we get close to the limit, what we can also do is spend more on things like infrastructure projects, emergency
That's what Eric
response.
was mentioning.
Yeah,
Earmarks that.
besides
But
tax
we're,
refunds,
we're,
like,
we've
yeah.
never been close in the 11 years I've been doing this, so we've never been close, not worried about us ever hitting it, so. And it'll just go on consent, because this is.
Yeah.
Same thing we'll see every year. And everybody, I mean, as I said, I just did it at County Connection too. Amber, I guess, is the only person that's actually seen anybody.
Actually, yeah.
Yeah, she's actually had one client that hit it, but otherwise, nobody ever comes close to this thing. I have to redo it at some point anyway, so I need a motion to move that on to council.
Motion to move the review of the proposed proposition for appropriations.
Okay, second that. All those in favor?
Aye.
Now we can review the updated long-term financial plan. Okay.
You have to try to talk for more than.
Yeah, no,
So today we're just doing the update to the long-term financial plan for fiscal year 24-25 to fiscal year 28-29. Obviously, the long-term financial plan just shows you an illustration of some of the financial challenges and opportunities that we're gonna face in the coming year and the out years. The focus of the long-term financial plan has always been the general fund. Even though technically Measure K is part of the general fund, most of that money is already been earmarked for projects, programs, the library debt service. So that's not, we touch on that a little bit at the very end, but for the most part, the numbers and the charts that you see is just the general fund without Measure K. Just as background, in the past, what we would normally do is, in previous years, we would basically do the long-term financial plan and the plan budget almost at the same time. They would literally get approved and accepted by council at the same time. And what we suggested a year ago was when we brought this to the budget committee and then to council was, in theory, we want this a little bit sooner than the biennial budget process. So I said, let's go ahead and we'll do the update on that update. We will do the long-term financial plan like we did last year. But we'll just do an update this year, and then every off budget year, we will update the long-term financial plan. But for this year, all we were going to do was just update it since we just did it last year. And then obviously today, we're going over just the updated portion of the long-term financial plan. So the only one of the differences would be, the Councilmember Long would be, like last year, we would bring in the scenarios, the assumptions to the budget committee prior to actually building them. So this year, since we're just updating, we didn't have to.
want a cough drop?
So,
Oh, I have a whole pocket.
Okay, I just, I had one, so I.
Sorry, when you say that you're not building into the budget, you're just basically providing an update as in a forecast of what your expectations are.
So since we do the budget every 2 years.
Yeah.
We're gonna do this the off year. And so we're only updating it because we redid the whole thing last year at the same time as the budget. And we just wanna get it on a different cycle now, so we're
Yeah.
just updating last year's to this year, and then we'll do a full review 2 years from now.
Why
So-
don't we align it with the biannual?
Well, it's easier to then make the decisions on the budget if we've done the long-term financial plan on the
Yeah.
off year, rather than trying to do them at the same time. It gives us a better tool if we do it on the off year than if we do it at the same time. So that's why we can update it, but the basic long-term plan, financial plan will be done every other year, off years, so we can use that to then formulate the budget for the next year.
Okay.
Because if we're trying to do it at the same time, it's not very useful information for doing both at the same time, so we'll do it off years.
And one of the things my predecessor did, that makes it a little bit more, is already in the budget itself, the adopted budget, there is all a 5-year forecast too.
Yeah.
Um, again, that's why this made more sense to do it in the off year, so at least you have the adopted budget from last year, you will have this as well as you go into the budget season.
We initially were doing this 10 years, but it doesn't make any sense to do it 10 years because there's so many changes that happen in that process that 10 years made no sense to do, so we shortened it up to a 5-year long-term plan instead of 10 years.
So we're looking at 5 years
Yeah.
rather than 10.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how slow that transition is. Anyway, you gotta switch the views. Oh, wait, no, I take back this isn't the right view, sorry. I thought this looks bigger on my screen when I'm in my office. I kind of jumped to the conclusion in a table above ahead of time, just because I think it gets us a better picture of how the city is doing. When you look at revenues, for example, last year was about 31.4 million. The adopted budget was for fiscal year 24-25 with 31, again, was 31.4. The revised estimates is 31.1 million. Expenditures, last year about $26 million adopted budget, not including the unfunded actual liability. 29.3, and then estimate right now is 27.3 million. So even if you go to the out years, you can see that revenues less expenditures, we're really good. We're positive, 3.8 in the current year. Unfortunately, we have to make that first unfunded actual liability payment. So once you factor that in, which was 3.9 million a year ago, 4.5 this year, and it grows to about 6.5 after the forecast. Now that's what brings us into that deficit number. So there's a lot of things that city council and staff can control. That PERS whale number is not one of those things that we control. If we were to just look at expenditures necessarily within the city's control, expenditures are growing about 2 to 3% a year.
Yeah.
Revenues about 4% a year. The PERS unfunded actual liability is about 14% a year. So I just want to highlight that because I think it's important when sometimes the public says, well, you're not controlling costs. Unfortunately, this is a number that we get from CalPERS, and it's a check that we just have to write. So using that, our beginning fund balance started at about $15.7 million. And assuming all the projections under the monetary layout, excuse me, by 28-29, general fund balance would drop to $3 million. As Mayor Nowak knows, and Councilmember might know, the baseline normally for our reserves, we try to stay at 10, so we drop below $10 million when we get to fiscal year 26-27.
That's next year.
Well,
Next 2
well,
years.
It's,
Yeah, in 2 years, yeah. But so when we're looking at this, our revenues are obviously exceeding our expenditures, right? We're not spending as much. Our expenses aren't as high as our revenue. And we end up with a surplus every single year, but what's impacting us actually getting into a deficit is really the pension liability.
it's the only thing that gets us in there.
Yeah, that's the only thing that's getting us in there. And so I guess given our current financial outlook, how might we better align, maybe staffing to better support our priorities or without compromising
Well,
on your sense
so-
of services?
So this is always the tricky part, because this has looked this way every year that I've, that we've done this budget.
Yeah.
And what happens is, this also assumes fully staffed, and we're never fully staffed. So, if you would looked at this 3 years ago, you would have seen us at the same position, you would have seen us going below 10 million last year. And so, because of vacancies, we're never fully staffed. The revenue, the expense number is never quite as high as is in the forecast.
Because there's just a 10% attrition rate, right?
Well,
Pretty
there's
much generally.
attrition, or it's just vacancies, whatever the vacancies are, and so the vacancies end up usually allowing that surplus to be higher than what's in our projections. But we have to do this because our goal is obviously to be fully staffed, but so we have to project that way, but it never really happens, and so it ends up, I would expect this year that we're not gonna be, well,
Well, that's why the estimate you already, and we'll talk about this
Yes,
later
yeah.
in the presentation.
so
So you're projecting all full FT, you're basically you're projecting our full
full staff.
staff, right? And in the end, of the year, it looks almost as though we will have, it won't drop at least all the way to what, 2.6 million?
Correct. Correct.
Yeah, see, that's what we had budgeted, a loss of 2.6, and it's
Yeah.
only gonna be 600,000. So, and that's been the same case for a lot of years. So even though 25, 26 is projected at 2.6, depending on our vacancies, we could be at 600,000 again. So,
Is that, does that seem like in line with what the previous years are? So if we looked at our trend from before, instead of it being 2.6, are we roughly around 600,000 every single?
No, it varies.
it varies.
It varies year to year, and the mayor's right, we as, unless council directs us differently. Myself and my predecessor, when you say, you've authorized X as your head count, we budget for X. Now, and I kind of mentioned this, I think at LGA, and then I mentioned it at budget
Yeah.
presentations, is the one difference is in the old days, and the old days wasn't that long, like 2000. In 2000, when you fully budgeted for staff, the old days used to be top salary for every police officer, top salary for every position that you had, and you assume fully loaded. So you assume that they took the family plan for dental, vision, Kaiser, whatever it was, they were fully loaded at the highest possible rate. That used to be conservative budgeting. Well, partly because that's what, it was a lot quicker and faster to do it that way. And Excel wasn't quite as fancy back then. But today, even today, when we budget for, or when I budget for vacancies, I don't assume top step full family. Like for example, I know we have a couple of vacant police officers. I might assume one's family has a family plan or is married. I might assume one's single. So again, you take that, you kind of take some assumptions with that. We don't go fully loaded. So even for people that were here, like I said, like I mentioned, Belmont, City of Belmont days, even for positions that are currently staffed, like for Ross's position, I didn't assume Ross at what he's currently making. I assumed max salary, max benefit for budgeting. Whereas today we don't. I basically assume, I know what Ross is making. I know if he has a step increase, for example, I do assume that.
Okay.
So those kind of factors get factored in. And that's what's factored into the estimates, or sorry, in the adopted budget.
But overall, we're still running a deficit, basically around 600,000 or so.
No, every year depends. So for example, like last year, we were, and this is why you were able to transfer money into the Section 115 trust. We were over $1 million. The year prior, same thing.
Okay.
So once it gets finalized, the numbers will definitely be better than negative 2.6 million. What that number will be, we won't know until we actually close the books. This is our best guess as of today.
And that's with fully staffed and based on.
Well, the
Well-
24-25 estimate is Eric's best estimate of what's gonna be at the end of this year. Next year, it's the fully loaded projections, but the estimate versus the adjust.
Yeah,
See,
because our actual in FY 23-24, we actually did, it was 1.8, right?
Right, and the
And then-
projections were a deficit. originally. So we ended up much better
Yeah,
in 23-24.
what did we see in 22-23? I mean, I don't, you might not have the number off the top of your head, but
The
was
same
it
thing.
something
It
better?
was not 1.9, it was something, it was over 1 million, again, that's why we were able to do transfers back then.
And during COVID was even more so because we expected revenues to go down, sales tax numbers to go down.
Yeah.
And they actually went up because of the Wayfair decision, and so we had ended up in a lot better position than we expected during COVID. So you know, this is all, that's why when you look at this, I don't want anybody to get alarmed because I've been looking at these red numbers for years. And we did a couple of times have to make some adjustments because we will do some of that. We'll freeze a couple positions if the year is gonna look tough or things like that, and next year could be, depending on where the economy is.
Well, as we look at the UAL expenditures, that number is continuing to increase.
We can't do anything about that.
Exactly, there's nothing that we can do about that, but I mean, just in budgeting wise, I hear you, Eric, in regards to how you budget, where you're projecting full capacity of staff. But we are seeing a growth in the UAL expenditures, and in the end of the year, we may do better. That's what I hear you're saying is that we may end up with not a deficit, rather maybe a 1.8 increase at the end of the year, similar to previous years. But are there any creative solutions that we can probably explore to close the budget gap? Like, let's just say we end up dropping from, you see, 15 million of an estimate to 12 million, our ending fund balance, and then moving forward to future years. By the time we get to 28-29, we're at 2.9, based on the information that we have here, because our expenditures is going up as well as our revenue. And then there is that UAL expenditure that increased to 6.4 million.
And it's at the end of the presentation, I mean, there's some thoughts that obviously staff has put forward. It really, at the end of the day, it's up to council to decide, do they wanna move forward with some of those options? Some of them we have done, some of those options have other steps that have to take place, and some of them are a little easier, some of them a little harder. Really quickly to go through the rest of this slide, again, one of the things that, as the mayor just mentioned, you know, the sales tax, we've seen some very nice increases, partly due to the Wayfair decision, since online sales kicked in. Obviously, the federal stimulus helped as many people, I know my wife, for example, did a lot of online shopping, so that helped as well. You weren't traveling to San Francisco. You weren't traveling to San Francisco to eat lunch or anything, you were spending money at home. So we saw sales tax jump up over $11 million right after COVID. As you know, if you were you know, when COVID first happened, and if you were here, the HDL projections, and nobody really knew, was across the board, they were assuming 25% cut, reduction of 25% sales tax for every city throughout the state of California. That was scary. Now, what I will say is Pleasant Hill didn't see that, and most of the cities around us didn't see that. But for example, San Francisco, Oakland, the major cities did, because you weren't going to have anything to go into those cities anymore. Well, you back off that federal stimulus, we're slowly returning back to the office. But some of the expectation of the leveling of sales tax was bound to happen. And you're seeing that. It's a little bit lower, even when you heard the HDL projection a couple months ago, and it's a little bit lower than what the forecast originally had. So property tax, again, you might recall after the Great Recession, if you lived in Contra Costa County, the assessor automatically did, if I remember correctly, either 20 or 25% assessment value across the board throughout Contra Costa County. You did not have to file a piece of paper. Normally, when you do an assessment or reassessment of your home, you know, you have to do a lot of paperwork and have to check in. You automatically just did that the next day, basically.
For anybody that had taken a cut, for anybody that had reduced their property tax because they had purchased their house recently, then when their values dropped, they dropped it. And so, like for me, I bought my house in '98, so I didn't get that benefit because my value was still above where it was. But anybody that bought their house in a couple of years, they could benefit from a reduction in their property tax. And then once we came out of it, he automatically bumped everybody up 20-25% back, because you're not limited to the Prop 13 limitations on property tax.
Well,
If you
that
had
makes
it
sense.
dropped.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
does make
right,
sense.
so that property tax went back up.
And what that really meant for Pleasant Hill was, so for several years after the Great Recession, we saw property tax values, 6 to 8% annually because two factors. Home sales were still relatively expensive. And then two, yes, he every year ramped it back up. He's go all the way back up to what the assessment value was, plus whatever the cost of living adjustment was at that point in time. So over several years, you saw our property tax values climbing to 6 to 8%. Whereas in HDL's projection, that is gone, or that piece of that I should say gone. The assessment has already got brought back up to the values of where they were, if not more. And then obviously today with higher interest rates, instead of 6 to 8%, we're seeing somewhere in the ballpark of 3 to 4% property tax revenue growth. I think we talked a lot about pensions. I'll skip that for now. And then last but not least, and definitely not least, is one of the things that we'll be entering into in the coming months, or definitely next fiscal year, is labor negotiations with all of the bargaining partners. So again, that's something to look forward to.
Okay. We're being taped.
Again, we do the 10-year look back from fiscal year 14-15, which is a little over $23 million to 23-24, which is $31 million. You'll notice the one dip is fiscal year 2021. Obviously, that was our COVID year. We did see a dip in sales tax, obviously, in that year from 9.5 million to 9.2. But as we kind of mentioned earlier, because of the federal stimulus, because before a moment, it jumped to $11.4 million in fiscal year 21-22. And it's even in 22-23, it stayed at almost $11 million. And then you're seeing that leveling off to rounded up to about 10.6 million for 23-24. Just on average, and these percentages are pretty much similar from the 10-year, even if you compare it to last year. On the 10-year average, about 27% property tax, 23-24 about 29%, sales tax, that's 36% on average. Last year about 34. Again, that's really, you see those jumps, $11 million in that 10-year trend. That's why you see it jump to 36. It's kind of leveling off. That's why you see it 34%. The only thing that I'll mention, last thing on this slide is the other revenue, that 8 to 12%. It's really interest revenue. It's the fact that, again, after the Great Recession, interest rates were basically zero for a very, very long time. They started to climb a little bit, and then COVID happened, and they dropped back to zero. Last year, obviously, they were somewhere, I think they averaged somewhere about 3 to 4%. So that's why you're seeing that climb. And as I kind of mentioned in the audit, as well as on the financial plan, we have to do that fair market value adjustment for accounting purposes, and that was $500,000 of interest gain. But again, that's a paper gain.
What we haven't seen come back to pre-pandemic levels is the transit occupancy tax. Oh, that's your next slide. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, I didn't mean to
That's-
jump ahead, but that has not come back to the level we were hoping.
So we've already kind of talked about.
Hotel tax, right?
Yeah. So we've already kind of talked about property tax and sales tax. I'll just, again, as Mayor just mentioned, it's really that TOT that really has not come back. So fiscal year 2019, it was about 2.5 million, and Hilton Home and Suites up in that fiscal year. If we were to go back to the long-term financial plan back then, or the following year, pre-COVID, this number was supposed to be closer to $3 million, and it might have been that without COVID. COVID happened, $1.6 million the very next year. Drastic drop. And it's recovered, but we've been hovering right around $2.2 million every year for the last couple of years.
Could have been attributed to the fact that we had less events and it was COVID, and then now are we ramping up to the same amount of events that we had prior, or what was driving the TOT revenue prior to the pandemic?
So from basically for Pleasant Hill, we get more of our TOT revenue for people that come in for businesses. So for example, hey, they're working over at the oil refineries because they're consulting, or they're consulting somewhere within the area. That's what
Traveling nurses.
Yeah.
is a-
So do you think that has kind of impacted, like that's reduced around
I
this
don't think
area?
I don't think it's really reduced, it just hasn't grown. And for a while, we were expecting a new hotel to be opened, which is not happening.
Was it-
Well, it's up for sale, the property's up for sale, so it was originally gonna be a Cambria hotel. And then they sold it to Marriott Courtyard, I guess, and now they're selling the property. That was where the old Black Angus was. And so that was supposed to be a hotel. But, you know, because they're mostly long-term, they're residence hotels, not tourist hotels.
Yeah,
A lot of our events don't bring in people overnight. They're not overnight activities. And so most of those are local people coming around. It's really most of this, you know, business people, traveling nurses, refinery people that are in for a couple months in order to, you know, work on the refinery and things like that. That's the bulk
kind
of
of like
our,
project-based work that they're doing.
much more project-based work,
Yeah.
work than tourist, type business. So, and I think all the hotels, we're not unusual there. I don't think when we saw the last numbers from, Visit Pleasant Hill, the hotels around us are not doing any better, either in Walnut Creek or Concord. So everybody's got the same issue there.
Because that, for example, I don't remember the current plan of the Concord Naval Weapons Station anymore. No, one of the hopes originally was they wanted to build a stadium there. It didn't have to be a major league stadium, but even for example, if you have kids or been to any travel ball tournaments, you know, hundreds of kids,
Yeah.
parents, they're staying somewhere. I think that was Concord's, part of Concord's original plan was to build something like that because they know if they had a stadium, for example, for baseball and softball kid tournaments. That brings in a lot of additional revenues from TOT, obviously, to restaurants. I know that was one of the original hopes was to have that.
They
That
were
was-
actually gonna build it downtown, not the Concord Naval Weapons Station. They
Well,
were
volleyball
gonna-
volleyball's a huge thing right now, and when I went to.
Yeah, this was gonna be a big soccer
Yeah,
arena
yeah.
for minor league soccer.
Yeah.
thing.
No,
Not
yeah.
not an enclosed arena, it was gonna be a outdoor soccer arena for.
Yeah, I just mentioned that because when I was in Sacramento, for a wedding, you can see all of the families that are there staying at the Marriott or the Hyatt and things like
Well,
that.
yeah, and you will
because of
hear
these
from
events.
Andre, it's, you know, water polo's the same thing, baseball's, they're all the same thing. I mean,
Yeah.
Concord already has quite a few soccer fields out there that they hold some big ones there. But they were actually hoping for a minor league professional soccer team to be, they were gonna put that downtown.
Yeah.
And we don't have something like that. I mean, the only space that is available is DVC, and that's not even the cities, that's DVC, so.
Now, I mean, but you know, Visit Pleasant Hill works with DVC to, when events come into DVC or things like that, to fill up the hotels. But it's, again, it's, you know, that's, we don't have that many big sort of tournaments that come here. I mean, College Park has some as well in DVC, but it has some, they're not that big. So we don't, and we will get people from Walnut Creek and Concord. If the events are there, we'll get people there too,
Yeah.
but it just in general, it hasn't gone up. So TOT has sort of stayed the same.
So it sounds like there's no overflow, even if there are events in Concord or Walnut Creek, that they would end up being.
We do get overflow.
Well, I mean, most recently, as you're saying, the trend in
Yeah.
our neighboring cities aren't really, their TOT isn't up to.
No, there's,
the same
there's
amount.
not, and some of it's because the hotel room rates are not up the size they were either to get more people in, right?
Yeah.
Just a quick segue, we are actually we plan to have Visit Pleasant Hill's annual report done with council in August. So we'll have a further, more of an opportunity to converse.
I think I should meet with Trish before we do that. Just to. Sure,
Just, but
Yeah.
appropriate, that's the timing is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. My phone shut down. Sorry, I can't find my phone. There we go. Sorry.
Again, taking the assumption, and again, but our biggest driver really is sales tax and property tax, so that's why that information is critical to us. The actual was about $31 million, and then by the time you get out to fiscal year 28, 29, it's about $35 million. So for the estimate, obviously, is the 10.5 was what HDL presented to you a couple months ago. Same thing for the forecast for fiscal year 25-26 at $10.8 million in sales tax. Property tax normally is a little bit more predictive because obviously you can only grow up 2%. But normally you're behind, so you kind of know the property tax information ahead of time. The only thing you don't know ahead of time is what's actually gonna sell. Cause you do get some supplemental property taxes, from, when you buy your home, like, depending on when you bought it. You might owe, assuming the home is more than what the previous person bought it for, you might owe some supplemental property taxes, and that piece you get it when it comes in. They can't predict that piece.
So we don't have any, there are no assumptions in the sales tax revenue for the Osaka market coming in or anything like that, so
Not good.
that's, okay. So that's a piece that won't be added to that, and then hopefully they can do something with Bed Bath and Beyond.
Yeah, I mean, the HL, as they mentioned a couple of, they backed off, they backed out the Bed Bath and Beyond because they knew we weren't getting that anymore. Obviously, the Bye Bye Baby, they back out.
Right.
So for things that they know about, they can build it into their projections. They can do that, but they obviously still, when stores drop off, they adjust for that too.
I mean, you couldn't forecast for Osaka without actually seeing a year at least of what their revenue and sales are.
You can, I mean, we did it for CarMax, when CarMax came in, we sort of forecasted what we would expect. Conservatively expect to get from that type of revenue, that we have done that in the past where something's coming in, when
But
order
how
supply
have you
came
done
in.
that though? Without
Well,
any of
it
the
would be
data?
like it would assumed, space of a grocery store type thing. And what a grocery store that size would typically bring in sales tax revenue, you can estimate that from grocery store sales. That you can.
Take it
do
from
that.
other
Yeah,
information,
there's,
other
there's-
data.
Yeah,
points
so
that
you
you're
can
talking
take a
about. Okay.
conservative number from that and include it in, but it's not in this number, so that's helpful. But we've done that before when hotels are coming online. Or, when Orchard Supply came online, we factored that in to the following year, knowing it was coming in. So you can factor that stuff in. Usually you don't wanna factor it in unless there's, a signed lease and you know for sure it's coming in, but we factored in the Elmwood Hotel when we knew that was gonna come in as well. We factored those things in the projections.
I was just gonna say, we also, missing one of the triad here, myself, Eric, and Zach Seal meet with HDL on a quarterly basis, we walk through, and Zach does apprise them of, hey, Crumbs and, other places that have come online,
The
the Royale. When there are restaurants and other businesses, he just makes sure that they are aware of them, if they hadn't already picked them up. So they can include them in their actual projections or their tracking. And then similarly, so Zach is also influential in that, he helps them with whatever information. And regarding the groceries, you're exactly right, it's projections based on other outside data, but we won't know until we know.
Again, this is very similar to the pie that you saw for the 23-24. Again, the bulk of it is property tax and sales tax, in regards to the revenue. A lot of numbers here, but again, I'll just highlight the biggest loss obviously for the city. And for most municipalities, there's always salary benefits. We're talking 23-24 was about 14 million out of a $21 million actual. 23-24 was 23 million almost out of a almost $30 million expenditures. So that continues to be our largest cost as we provide public service.
Eric, if you would, when you do that chart going forward, could you break out the UAL from the salaries and benefits so that we see that separate?
I do it, you'll see this in a different slide.
Oh,
when I do
okay,
departments. I think I wanted to stand out for other reasons.
Okay, yeah, cause I just wanted, that was.
The two things I'll mention here is transfers out, it varies every year, for the most part today, what transfers out is for vehicle replacement, IT capital, obviously any city, like the roof, part of that comes from that. In the old days, pre-measured paydays, we used to do a lot of more transfers in regards to street and road projects. We were counting now on Measure K to help us provide that street and road funding. It no longer comes out of the general fund anymore.
So we're transferring less out because Measure K funds are now paying for those projects, so.
And then the other piece I'll mention here is, and I know it's really small, but you can see it gets larger, is insurance. If you look at 14-15, insurance was about $500,000. By the time you get to fiscal year 23-24, it's 1.4 million. So cities are facing the same things that we see as individuals as home insurance, car insurance. all those things that drive up costs for cities as well. Including the fact that we don't, obviously for cities, we also deal with workers' compensation. We live in a state that has no caps on settlement costs. So all those issues, including fires across the state, have driven up insurance costs dramatically. On a percentage basis, actually, insurance has grown at a faster rate than the Persian whale. Just the dollar amount is less.
For supplies and materials dropped though, right? So,
It can, like in 2021, that was COVID, so obviously a lot of things dropped in 2021. So each one of those years, it's, supplies and materials can vary, so depending on what it is. So for example, the public works department assumes a certain amount for things breaking down. Well, if they don't break down, they don't need to spend it. If they do, obviously they're gonna use their budget.
did you forecast like an amortization of like what the maintenance cost would be? Just to do that.
Well, no, we do budget the maintenance division within these lines. So that's-
Well, I mean, like, do you amortize it, like, for example, maintenance for a roof, which would take like 2 to 3 years or something, every 2 to 3 years on that cycle, sorry, a roof is not every 2 to 3 years, let me retract from that, it's about 10 years or more. But let's just say, for example, you need to do maintenance for, I don't know,
The library.
the library or something.
Maintenance is not amortized. If it's a capital expenditure, it's amortized, but a maintenance is never amortized.
Okay.
So,
Depreciated.
so what
But it also
And,
includes
well,
supplies and materials though.
Yeah, so supplies and materials is literally, you actually need a tool or a supply to actually clean or build or fix something.
Yeah.
Your example is, so for example, in a different city I worked for, we had everything on the spreadsheet that was advertised from, for every vehicle, every city facility, we advertised and said, hey, for example, yes, we need to replace this roof in 30 years.
Yep.
How much money would we need to put aside if we really needed to do that? We wouldn't have, we don't do that today, we wouldn't, I'll be honest, we wouldn't have the funds to do that. So we don't, for example, take a library at $30 million and assume, hey, 30 years from now, we might have to build a new library, so let's start putting aside $1 million now to build that new library. Most public agencies don't do that because they just couldn't afford to do it. That's why you end up doing what we did is issuing a bond or a private placement that issue and rebuilding that facility. The budget basically assumes just basic maintenance of keeping that facility operating and maintaining on a daily basis. It's not replacing that facility. But again, as I kind of mentioned earlier, salary benefits, whether you look at last year or the 10-year average, it's up over 73% on the 10-year, 77% on last year. The increase is really more driven by the Persian whale. We'll see that more when we get to the departmental slide. As I kind of mentioned earlier, that the insurance piece is what's grown over, if we were to look at the 10-year, from about 3% to 5%. What was the last remark? Up here. Oh, I'm sorry. And then.
The insurance would have gone up.
Yeah, I had a question, I was
Well,
gonna
the
say
insurance would have gone up as well because of adding the library, right? I mean, we had.
Yes, I'm sorry, they go up.
I mean, just not just insurance rates, but we had to add a whole new building.
Well, I was just gonna speak on the insurance too, because in the prior slide, you said the insurance had gone up, and then it shows in the 10-year, it's going down from what we.
The 10-year
The
average.
10-year
Yeah,
average.
the 10-year average, okay.
So the average is about 3%. When you look at the last year, it's about 5% of the, or, yeah, 5% of the.
Cause it levels out for the premiums, right, okay, so.
Again.
Can we go back to the
Oh,
slide?
sure.
And then the transfers out is 8% in comparison to, but I thought we were using Measure K funds too.
So remember, this doesn't include Measure K.
Oh.
Does not.
This doesn't include Measure K. No, but in the previous slide, if we go back to the previous slide, our transfers out are less, so shouldn't we see that percentage drop in the 10-year plan as well?
Which you
No,
see some
because
earlier years too.
In the early years on the 10-year rate, it's high.
It's high.
So you would expect the 10-year to be high and the last year.
Go back to the previous slide, you can see on the early years, you got 2.4, 2.5, 2.8 and 3.2 in the orange.
And it's only recently that you've got them lower because of Measure K, but earlier years, they were higher.
See.
Yeah, you can see the drop. Measure K was turned on in fiscal year 17, and you can see the drop right after that.
Thank you for that.
Again, the assumptions that we used a year ago was what was 3.25 for 24-25, based on the MOUs. 24-25 is 3.5%, based on the MOUs. For the forecast, we used 3.25, but again, that will be, as I mentioned earlier, you go to labor negotiations, whatever the results of that will obviously impact the numbers. CalPERS, I did use the most recent actual evaluations from 23-24, so that's in here as well. Medical, we assume 6%. That's just based on the actual study by Bartel when we had them. Before my tax, I'm trying to remember the exact year, but again, the actual evaluation or actual assumptions normally assume medical costs about 6%, and then basically 3% for most everything else. The one thing that we do put into the long-term financial plan that we don't do for the actual budget is we do put an attrition of vacancy rate. So for example, when we did this a year ago, we assumed 600,000 as the moderate, which is 3% of salary benefits. And as you might have saw the financial plan, when we do the optimistic version, if we go up to 1 million, the pessimistic, I hate to use the word pessimistic because as you heard not that long ago from our HR manager, they've done a great job in hiring officers.
Yeah.
Which obviously means we have less vacancy and attrition. Again, so taking a look at 23-24, almost $30 million in actual last year. By the time we get up to fiscal year 28-29, we're looking at almost at $39 million. And again, our largest costs continue to be and will be salary benefits. And again, Virgin Whale was built into this. And you'll see that better when we get to the departmental slide. Again, this for the most part is consistent with the 23-24 percentages. Okay, and sorry it's a little scrunched, because the bar chart itself, the numbers don't change. It just shows it by department. I think that the pie actually does a better job of looking at the numbers, even though it takes an average of the estimate of the forecast. As you can tell, our biggest cost is public safety. Now that's all of our police officers, our dispatchers, they represent 43% of the pie. The next piece is really, all of our public works people, community development, planning, engineering at 19%. The unfunded PERS actual liability is 15% of the total pie. And then when you look at, for example, if you're 11% is finance, IT, and HR, and if you include risk management, which is insurance, that's 4%. So literally 4 divisions equal what that PERS unfunded actual liability cost is. So if there was a magic wand and like, well, how do we cut? Well, you would literally have to cut 4 divisions to equal that PERS unfunded actual liability. That's how hard it is. The 7% is really the city manager's office, PIO, as well as economic development at 7%. And that's why I use this pie to show you that PERS wheel, because this is how much of a budget overall impact it has to the general fund.
So on the chart on the left, the non-departmental and vacancy savings, what's the amount on that? Cause I mean, that we see.
Oh, I'm
Is
sorry, and that should be non-departmental, sorry, I changed it on one of the slides. That's really just non-departmental, and what that really represents is, in the actual financial system, we combine the PERS unfunded actual liability as well as all the non-departmental expense into non-departmental. For presentation purposes, we break that out, we break out the PERS whale separately. Non-departmental represent, for example, we've budgeted or continue to budget for when we have retirees. So we still have some long tenured employees, and in their MOUs, they have basically, when you retire, I think it was before 2011. Most agencies in the private sector, if you have any sick leave balance left, it's gone. You don't get to take it, you don't get to cash it, you don't get to do anything with it. What we had in those MOUs back then was, depending on how many years of service you had, you could cash out for future retired medical costs. So for example, we had, when the former city manager retired, the former police chief retired, they had a lot of years of sick leave on the books, which meant based on, and they were here long enough, that we had to write large checks for their future retired medical costs that we put into a trust. We calculate the number, we put the money in, that's our only obligation is to write that check. So that number, for example, last year was only $100,000 paid out of retirement. If you were to look back, I think you see the long-term financial plan, if you were to look back 2 years ago, that number was over $800,000. Other years it was 600,000. And as we trend out, and we still have a few of those employees left that have this benefit. Most of them have retired, but there's still a few left. Whereas whenever they decide to retire, we will have to write that check. Again, the only obligation is to write the check and put it for future retired medical costs. So that's what you see, that really the non-departmental, which also includes, for example,
So ultimately, it's a one-time that we pay for these non-departmental employees that are basically grandfathered in from 2011.
yeah, we do have some, for example, when employees cash out vacation, we also charge that to the non-department. Those are normally the largest costs when you look at non-departmental. There's a few other little amounts that we do as well there, but that's the biggest cost that you see, and that's really large in fluctuation.
So are there vacancy savings? I know you said it should just say non-departmental. What is our vacancy savings or our attrition rate per year? If you know off the top of your head. Is it like 10% or?
I remember vaguely from Erica's report, was it 6 or 5? I don't remember from her report, and I don't remember off the top of my head. But I mean, what you see, let's just jump to the next slide. Oh, far.
Cause I think that would be helpful to know, just what our attrition rate is.
Sorry, I know it's not in this one, it's in the budget update one, sorry. Yeah, I can get Erica that number for you, I don't know off the top of my head, I wanna say it's 5 or 6%. Okay. And then what you'll see in a later agenda is you'll see what that vacancy does from a budget standpoint. I know there's a lot of numbers here. The only thing this was supposed to highlight is that purge oil cost, it really is for those classic employees, the retirees and those classic employees that we still have a few on the books. And that's really that big cost that we're seeing every year. So it basically promises that the city has made to these retirees and to these employees. And obviously we're writing that check, but that's where that number is. If it was just the tier 2, so the city council back in after the Great Recession adopted the tier 2. So for example, I'm in that tier, I'm a classic, but I'm a tier 2 classic. And then obviously PEPRA kicked in the following year. Those amounts are fairly low on the unfunded liability. It's really those classic employees that we're still paying that liability for. Yes. So this is, taking a look at 23-24 through 37-38. Again, it goes from, if we were to go back to 2014, this number was a little over $900,000. So you can see by the time 2014-15, by the time we get out to in the mid 2030s, early 2030s, we're up to about over $6 million. Again, it basically when they kicked in PEPRA, when they turned on PEPRA, what it meant was you were no longer going to have any more classic employees into the plan except for maybe a few. So that basically meant it was a closed plan for the most part. So that's why that liability is closed off, and you basically have to pay it off over about 30 years. What CalPERS did was they did a ramp up of 5 years to basically make it easier in city budgets or municipality budgets. Instead of just amortizing it over 30, they kind of did a ramp up, and that's why you still see this thing keep climbing because you have to actually get there. Obviously, when you don't pay it off over a 30-year amortization, that means you have to pay more interest to get there, and that's what you're really seeing. And then eventually it will ramp down. That's why you see on the back end of this tail, you can see it ramping down to 2037-38 to about 3.6 million. It's really just illustrating getting through, or we're getting there. The years we're at the peak of this UAL cost. I just bring this back again. We kind of went through a lot of revenues, went through expenditures. So again, the controllables, I think the city does a relatively good job in the controllables. Revenues, it's mainly property tax and sales tax. It's that hard part of UAL. that's a challenge for the city on an annual basis. And again, one of the things that, I know the mayor and previous budget, committee members, as you said, we've been able to offset that partly because of good things, opening up hotels, sales tax going up, Wayfair decision, vacancies. And some of those things can continue hopefully. But this is supposed to just help you see a picture of if everything's fully staffed and assuming these assumptions, this is what it could look like. It doesn't mean it will look like this. And obviously, based on the past, it has not looked like this.
Yeah, and I think, the other thing to think about is if we, let's say, at the end of 24, 25, or 25, 26, are fully staffed and expect to stay there, then we'd have to start looking at ways to cut to get the deficit down, because we're not gonna get those savings, so that's, we look out that far, but that's without taking any action as well. And we have had to do that in the past, where we've had to make some cuts here or there, or change some things in order to reduce those expense numbers.
Well, yeah, so that's what I was thinking about, like, have we thought about other ways, like, adjusting our staffing structure, based on the information that we have right now? We are seeing that the increase of UAL expenditures will occur. I understand that we do have, at the end of the year, maybe less than the amount of what our deficit's gonna be, but we still will be in a deficit. So have we thought
But
about
we-
strategic ways to, Eric, to maybe kind of prioritize essential services, or, basically to manage our budget and fill those gaps?
I don't think we have a whole lot of fluff, sadly, in our expense
Well, I mean,
category.
maybe there are ways that we can look at realigning, positions and things like that, or consolidating, improving efficiencies, maybe even
Yeah, we
and reduce duplications, things like that.
I don't think we have much.
when I came on board in 2021, I was brought on as a community development director / assistant city
Yeah.
manager. I was then,
Promoted.
given the title promoted to city manager. We did not backfill the ACM or the CDD director position. We did create a public works director position, but it was not comparable salary, slightly less. We had our city engineer left, retired and left. We have not backfilled that position. That's a couple $100,000 fully loaded. We have not filled that position. Now we are managing. But I'm saying, like, we are trying, I am keenly mindful.
How are
of
you
positions we
managing
have
with
filled.
that? Are you getting consultants, or like how?
Well, thankfully, we have a long tenured engineer on staff who is also our public works director, and given the job description, that position can also fill in as the city engineer. In other realms, in other areas, we have consolidated positions or have shared admins. For example, Jessica actually works for Ling as well in the IT division. We are keenly mindful of our expenses, but I will be, to the mayor's point, we don't have a lot of fat on the bone. We are a very lean, mighty organization, I like to emphasize, but we are mindful because of these projections. So we always are trying to be efficient and mindful of expense, but as we have demonstrated, I think, throughout our history, it's not that our expenses are exceeding our revenues. It's that the UAL payment, which is based on classic employees who are gone. We have an obligation to pay those who already worked here. That's what we're grappling with. I'm not dismissing your question or concern,
Yeah.
but we are mindful and we do take those efforts. But it's not a matter of, oh, you're spending too much, cut back.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, we
UAL.
are, and
Yeah.
a good portion of it is public safety. And, we don't wanna, if anything, we'd love to add some more police. I mean, we've been at 44 for, I don't know how many years now, but a lot of years. We've been at 44 officers, and I would love to add some there, but we really can't. And so some of those things, and to cut public safety would be difficult, which is the
Yeah,
biggest
well,
piece of the budget.
I don't think that we're saying we're just gonna cut one specific department, but maybe we can start looking at a contingency plan of reviewing all of our departments and come up with a creative solution that we can explore to close the budget gap, because technically we are going to run into a deficit, right? And so we do wanna preserve our team capacity, and we don't wanna wait until next year to then say, okay, well, now we're kind of in a pickle now, we're seeing that this is happening.
Are there opportunities for us to look at contingency plans across our departments? And I hear you, what you mentioned where, now she's working in both areas, which I think is a great way. That's a great strategy of just being able to provide administration work throughout other departments. Are there other opportunities for us to look at, maybe through an analysis of a contingency plan?
Sure. Good, and we can have talked about that, maybe what that might look like. And what I kind of said to him is, the reality is, whatever that is, there aren't very many low hanging fruit on the tree anymore. It really is a matter of how much do you want to reduce service by. It isn't, I wish I could just say, yes, we could freeze every vacant position we have in the city and we could somehow cover this deficit. That's just, if the numbers, for example, if we were fully staffed, that's just, we couldn't get there. Or even if we froze every vacant position we had now, we couldn't get there, as I kind of said. When you're looking at 2.6 million, an example I think I used last year, if you were to look at a fully loaded officer, it's 150 grand a year. You're literally talking about 20 officers to make up that kind of deficit. There isn't an easy answer on at least in my mind, on the expenditure side. Yes, we might find, I'm not gonna say we won't find any money on the expenditure side to save here or there, and we do every year. So example, if we assume retirees and payouts, that doesn't always happen every year. But when you're looking at almost at $3 million, that's very hard to say there aren't those many positions. We were saving here and there, as Ethan mentioned. If we can, instead of a senior engineer, can we live with an associate engineer and we save some money there? Those kind of changes, Ethan and the public works director have put forward with. But if once we get to the larger numbers, it really is a modification of service and what we would need to reduce it by, assuming we had to do it on that side of the ledger.
And we actually were very fortunate the last time we negotiated with our unions. Many of the unions around us were getting 5 to 7% increases because of inflation.
Yeah.
And we were able to walk through with our unions to say, look, this UAL is not allowing us to do this. And so we were fortunate to be able to negotiate 3.25 and 3.5 when the county did 7, Concord did 5, they're gonna be in a big hole. So around us, everybody was doing higher numbers because of inflation.
Yeah.
We were very fortunate to keep ours at 3.25 by walking through with our unions, the issues that we've got on the UAL expenditure. So to some extent, I think, we continually have done that for the last several years, been very careful about any positions being added, any salary increases been added, have really been, I think, well managed because we have kept them down versus others around us. And we've got a lot of pressure because they know what others around us have been getting. So, and we'll have those negotiations again as their thing comes up.
And I think, when you mentioned that too, it was a good point, because I was thinking about that too, about the labor negotiation, about maybe, have we thought about like furloughs and things like that, or the 980 days, the 9-8 days where you work 4 days and you have the 5th day off. Just opportunities that we could explore, and looking at contingency plans where we're not just looking at staff that we're thinking about cutting, but like our expenditures. Clearly, our expenditures aren't as high. It's really the UAL that's impacting that.
Yeah.
So when we're looking at our expenditures, it's less than what our revenue is on a continuous basis, year over year trend. It is definitely our UAL expenditure that is causing us to go into a deficit. So I think, maybe we can look into it as an analysis for a contingency plan throughout our departments.
Yeah, I'm just saying, we're
lean, I understand.
we are very lean.
Yeah.
So you're not gonna get much dollars out of that, even in a contingency, like you're not gonna get much dollars out of that to resolve this issue. I think we have to look at other things, and we've talked about this because, the union contracts came up and they wanted to use Measure K dollars to cover increases to them. We have indicated when we went out with Measure K that was not gonna be done, even though legally it's allowed, we had promised that. Now, I honestly think that if we get to a point where the UAL is so big, we might have to go to the public and say, we're gonna have to use Measure K dollars to cover some of this.
Well, before we do that, I think we should at least look at our contingency plan and then at least look at it in overall.
Yeah, I'm telling you, you're not gonna get much dollars out of a contingency plan. I just, having gone through these numbers year after year and seeing the
Yeah.
staffing go from where it was to where it is today, there's not much that can be done on a contingency plan to get us there. You can't all of a sudden tell people, you know, you're only gonna get paid 4 days a weekend instead of 5. That's,
People, I understand that, but I mean,
that's not gonna work for most people.
yeah,
It's, and you can't do it in the police, right? And so we already do a half day on Fridays as it is, right? The office closes at noon, but, so I'm just saying, I don't think, even a contingency plan, we might get some savings out of it. I am concerned that that's not gonna do it. And so we have to really look on the revenue side of things and where we can get revenues from. I mean, hopefully we can get Bed Bath and Beyond leased up and some of those things will improve those things. But I think at some point we might have to be realistic and say, we either are gonna have to go out to the public to say, we're gonna need to use some of our Measure K dollars to cover these expenses until we get to this point. Now, Measure K ends in 2037,
2030, April 2037,
37,
the debt service in like.
ends in
2032,
32.
so we have a little over 4 years of, you know, in theory, Measure K money where we don't have a $2.5 million debt service payment.
Right, so from 2032 to 2037, we don't have a debt service payment. And we have entire debt service payment in reserve as well, so that gets freed up.
but how does that, so if we use the Measure K dollars towards this UAL expenditure that we're trying to cover, like almost feeling like it's a bit of a Band-Aid at this point in time, then how does that impact all the other projects, a part of our general plan and what we've actually decided that we've said to
Well,
the community that we're going
I don't, so our CPI is what, CIP is what, 5 years? We do a 5-year CIP? And so our 5 years CIP, we could obviously, we did it last year. Last year we did the CIP?
Correct, so
Year-
that goes up with the final budget, and the thing is, we haven't. Obviously, we have not budgeted out to 2032, so we haven't budgeted that $2.5 million, what it's gonna go towards.
Yeah, we haven't budgeted where that 2.5 million is going to for years 2033 and on. So that 2.5 million every year for 5 years is not budgeted right now, or not allocated to anything. So that money could be used. The only problem we have is, from my perspective, since I'm the only one left from that group, is communicating that to the public, that in order to avoid service cuts to public safety or even public works, we're gonna need to use that money to cover this for this period of time. And I think that's I think the public would be okay with that, honestly.
Has that gone before the Measure K committee?
Measure K oversight, that's why I'm saying we'd have to go out to the public, as long as the public's okay with it, the oversight committee will be okay, because it's the public saying, yeah, it's okay to use. If we used it without going through that, the oversight committee would have a heart attack, because it's not allowed. But if we went to the public and said, we wanna use this money for the next 5 years to cover our UAL, and the public says, okay.
Yeah.
Then oversight committee will be fine, because it's been approved by the public. So I think that's how we'd have to get around it, but I think that gives us the opportunity to give us a lot of relief if we can use that 2.5 million from 20, now it's a little late,
But how
because
does
we're gonna
that-
have to address it earlier on, but
Okay, yeah, no, I hear you, but how does that impact then the projects that we plan on in future years?
we
Because-
only do a 5-year
Yeah,
plan. So the 5 years only goes out to 2030 right now, so we don't have anything planned for 2030 and out.
And then the city council readopts it every 2 years, so even though we do a 5-year plan, those 2 years is locked in for sure. You have just like you have in the forecast, you have a lookout to those other 3 years,
Yeah.
but every 2 years, you relook at that plan. And say, well, okay, these 2 years we're locking in.
Yeah.
Those other 3 years of the 5-year plan, you have an idea of what it is we're gonna spend, And maybe some of those projects, you really can't move around, like, I'll just use CCB Taylor. The plan says X,
Yeah.
okay, you really know that really is locked in. So in the case of when Measure K debt service is relieved, we haven't even gone out that far yet. And again, the council at that time will make that decision, what they would like to do with those Measure K funds. We haven't, those have not been spoken for when we go out that far, and that far.
And the other side on CIP, just to be clear, is there's not just one source for CIP funding. So much of what we do is
Grants.
based on grants and allocations from regional bodies, whether they're federal through state, or whether it's state down through regional, or all of the above combination thereof. We have, as you all just saw Monday night, SB one gas telephone to Measure J, kind of regional wide tax measure. We get sources, return to source monies from various places that are not, so we are not solely dependent on our general fund or Measure K to do all of our CIP. We do rely upon other outside sources.
Like the light at Civic
Yeah.
was grant money, the light at
The flashing beacons was a great.
the light, that was different.
Those are-
The light at on Gregory and
Oh, wait, Eleanor,
Eleonora, that was grant money as well. So none of those, small amount came out of the general fund, but the bulk of it came from grant on both of those lights. CCD is also $8 million grant money, so a lot of those big projects are grant funded.
Which is great, I think the staff is doing amazing and getting these grant funds to help support our city.
We've always been very lucky. with
Yeah,
grant
we've been
funds.
very lucky on
But no,
that.
it's been years and years, ever since I've been here.
You
we've
do
had
great.
no, the only reason I raised that is you were following a path of what happens to the CIP and the projects we
Yeah.
do. And I just want to be clear that a lot of our CIP is not just funded solely with local dollars,
Right.
local tax, sales tax dollars, or property tax dollars. There's a lot of other regional statewide money that we bring in
Yeah.
to pay for things. And what you just highlighted, the most obvious right now is the CCB, Taylor CCB project. 4.8 million reasons why that project move forward, and that is in the form of a grant from CCDF. So those, and then we cobble together other sources. I apologize, I don't want to belabor the point,
No.
just to say CIP is actually a combination of many
Of
sources,
many
not
different
just
funding
general.
sources, yeah. So back just to, on that same discussion of Measure K, have we thought about even just trying to use the Measure K funds, again, going to the public, as you mentioned, Sue, because the promise was for specific projects rather than having to cover the UAL. Have we thought about using Measure K funds to put it in the trust so that we can increase that amount first, the interest, before we start trying to
So-
pay this?
we'd have to go to the public either way, whether we put it in the trust or whether we
Because-
paid it off, either way. Plus, right now, a lot of the free Measure K money has projects allocated to it. We were talking about the 2032, when the debt gets paid off, it frees up $2.5 million at that point. But we're already at we're in the middle of the hump period for the payments, right? We
Right.
still have to get through 28 right there. We have to get through 2028, 2029, and 2030 in order to get to 32 and 33 when those monies go up, right? So we've got 3 years we gotta deal with before we have freed up Measure K dollars. Right, so that 2.5 that gets freed up, Measure K dollars doesn't start until 2032.
Yeah, so that's, when you say it doesn't get freed up until 2032, that's why I was talking about having a contingency plan, because if right now, those dollars are already allocated, as you mentioned.
Well, they're not fully allocated, I shouldn't say that either, because there are some things in there, but a lot of it is in the CIP, but we'd have to take a look at, there's some flexibility there, I'm just saying. Then we'd have to decide when we go to the public to say, yeah, we need to use this. Or even go to the public and say we want to extend it, and then we could borrow against it, which, is an option as well. It expires in 2037. We go to the public and say we want to extend it 5 years and then borrow against the revenues to upfront to pay some of that stuff off. There's a variety of things you can do with it, but we'd have to go out to the public first, and that we have to figure out when when is a good time to do that?
Yeah.
So,
And again, if we can lay some, and some of these come up later in the end of the presentation.
Yeah.
We can definitely talk about them we can start thinking about it. And that's the intent of the long-term financial plan, to get city council, the rest of the city council's ideas as well. I think there's still some time, there isn't, we don't have to do this, for example, tomorrow, we need to implement a contingency plan. You still have some time to think about it, there are options. Only thing I'm a little hesitant to is when we start talking about, some of the things you can do on the salary personnel side. You may wanna have that conversation, because a lot of those things have to be negotiated. So even if you would like to do some things, and even in the slide ahead, even if you would like to do some things, all of your bargaining partners have to buy into those things as well. For the most part, you can't get to a part where you can't, but it's, you don't want to get into
it's
this.
really ugly.
Okay, this is small, I was gonna try to just jump through this. This just assumes everything goes optimistically or everything goes pessimistically. For the most part, it assumes sales tax and property tax are % higher than what the moderate assumption was. The main difference here, it does assume on the optimistic scenario that COT jumps 4%. Because that is one area where we do have capacity growth, and we can get back to even what it was in 2018-19. And then it's just minor adjustments in like the business and other revenue. Again, on the personnel side, PERS I didn't change at all, there is no moderate or optimistic scenarios for PERS, unfortunately. Salaries, it assumes a 3% instead of 3.25 now for the forecast, and the pessimistic is 4%, and then moderate adjustments for some of the operational and transfers. And then the last piece, vacancy. So vacancy assumes 5%, which is about $1 million. And then the pessimistic assumes 1.5%, which is $300,000.
So that's kind of where we were talking about earlier about the attrition rate, so you're about 5% for basically what you're saying in the optimistic scenario.
Again, this is just at the very high level. So, and I think this is one of the issues. I think the budget committee in the past years has seen, in the optimistic scenario, when it comes to vacancies, we probably hit those numbers or better. So that's why we haven't had to take any drastic measures to date. We've had vacancies, we've had some better revenue numbers. So the general fund balance has actually grown instead of decreased over the previous years. So if you were to look at the old budgets, as the mayor was saying, yes, if our ending fund balance should be 15.8 if we were just, or 15.7 if you were to go by budget, it'd already be around $12 to $10 million now. So some might say the optimistic scenario might be more accurate. Even with that, it gets to about $7.5 million by the time you get out to 28, 29. The pessimistic scenario, your general fund balance drops to negative almost 400,000 by the time you get 28, 29. So we include those as well, just to show you what it could look like based on that. So this is some of the stuff that Councilmember Laws talked about. So again, as Ethan mentioned, we do look for state and federal funding, but unfortunately, there literally isn't too much state, federal, or local funding for general fund operations. The little we get is mainly for public safety, and we're talking in the ballpark of 30 grand, maybe 40 grand a year in regards to public safety. But for the most part, when it comes to general fund day-to-day operations, cities have to basically sustain themselves. When it comes to capital projects, in general, it's a lot easier to find some other funding sources. But when it comes to day-to-day operations, that's a lot harder to do. One of the things that was in the previous long-term financial plan and last year and even the ones before that was to look at your fee schedules. We had a consultant last year do a full master fee schedule update. So that piece is done. We implemented those changes last year. And our boss has a new item coming up later in the agenda, but again, just like it was in 2003, the same thing for this year was to just incorporate a CPI factor. We did that when Ross will talk more about that later. Revenue enhancements, I don't go into a lot of detail about this. You kind of already talked about it, but that requires additional steps, both from council and then obviously from the residents of Pleasant Hill for the most part. Expenditures, insourcing and outsourcing, we kind of do that a little bit, especially for example when we have I know it's gone a little bit back and forth, especially when it comes to the engineering department. Hey, does it make more sense to have a contractor or have a consultant do some of the engineering work, or does it make more sense to have a full-time employee? And there's always trade-offs with both. Obviously, employee, for the most part, is here Monday through Friday. The consultant is normally more expensive on an hourly rate, but you're not paying any benefits for him or her. Excuse me. And there's trade-offs, and it always goes back and forth between are the trade-offs worth it? And that's that departments have fought with that. I'll give you an easy one. I know for a long time, a lot of people said for finance departments, why don't you just go to ADP for payroll? Can't we just save a lot of money there? The reality is you end up needing a full-time payroll person. For example, at County Connection, I still needed 2 full-time payroll people when we had ADP. There is not necessarily a savings just because you went to a third-party payroll source. And especially since most of those sources are not designed for CalPERS. You basically need a person anyway, just because I need the information from that third party to actually get it into CalPERS. So there was no savings necessarily by outsourcing payroll. We kind of mentioned, yes, you can modify service levels. Again, that may require conversations with your bargaining partners. Same thing for cost sharing. That will require some kind of negotiations with your bargaining partners.
We did look at that, the last time we negotiated whether we could increase the cost sharing for the employees on the pension stuff. And it ended up not being really effective, no matter how we looked at it. That was just the pension stuff, not other stuff, but that was a piece of it.
When you say increased cost sharing for employee benefits, how did you guys approach that?
Oh,
So the amount that the employee pays toward their pensions, increasing that amount
Oh, from the
that the employees pay. And we had sort of looked at it saying, okay, we'll bump up their pay similar to the increased cost sharing, and it didn't really pan out. And so we were better off with just keeping the salary increase at 3.25 versus 5 than trying to fiddle around with the increased cost sharing, because you can't sort of do that without sort of the offset, because otherwise you're just reducing their pay basically. So we looked at that.
Again, you've already talked about Measure K. In regards to the future. Again, all of this is you've already talked about it. Was the only thing I was going to mention here is yes, that their service turns off in 2032. Obviously, the sales tax measure goes on until April of 2037. Is there capacity that hasn't been spoken for? Yes, the council at that point in time will make a decision or can make a decision what they want to do with that $2.5 million. The previous council has already made a decision to put aside $2.5 million as a debt reserve. So one of the things that normally you would have with any kind of a bond issuance is we're requiring a debt reserve of some kind. The city did was a private placement, so we basically, the best deal was working with our bank. Was bank that was at the time is now BMO. They gave us the best interest rate. One of the things that a private placement, when you work with your own bank, it doesn't require a debt reserve. We kind of wanted to have that in place, just in case. Obviously, we bounced back quickly, but you saw a dip in sales tax in the year of COVID. What none of these scenarios still factor in is a recession. So we wanted to make sure that we could continue some of the projects and programs that we have in Measure K and not worry about the debt service payment. So the council went ahead and put aside a full year of debt service aside just in case. So we do have that moving forward. But what we try to do again, for the most part, other than that, we do try to allocate, every 2 years, Measure K money to these different projects and programs, because it wasn't, as much as I may like to keep it in a savings account and build interest income, that wasn't the intent of these funds.
And it did provide a bit of relief from the general fund as well, because for example, the library operations used to come out of the general fund. And we could use Measure K for library operations, so we were able to shift the money that was paid for out of the general fund for additional hours from the library into the Measure K dollars. So there are some little pieces here and there that we were able to relieve the general fund expenditures from.
And the mayor's correct, so in the old days, the Monday hours used to come out of the general fund. Now it's grown because we have a facility now to maintain, which was the county, so that's grown a little bit, but we need to maintain that facility, it's important to the city. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, the other piece, well, the streets and roads piece was a lot, that used to all come out of the general fund and we now use Measure K. And just to continue getting our, I know you talked about it on Monday night, to continue getting gas tax and SB1 funds, we do have a minimum requirement we have to spend ourselves out of our general fund monies. Measure K qualifies as general fund, that we need to spend to continue receiving gas tax at SB1.
So our fund balance seems to remain flat even with all the changes. that we've
Well,
done.
we're really trying to, because we have the 2.5 already
Yeah.
for the debt service. There's no reason to keep a greater reserve there, really.
So I
Except
had,
for that.
yeah, I had a question though, but for the city projects, is there a reason why we didn't have any expenditures for the future forecasts on that?
Oh, because in the 2-year cycle, that's all so again, when the council revisits this again in a year. No, there may be, but again, we didn't have anything in the 5-year CIP plan, but there could be. But we don't know yet. The only thing we knew was the coming year, at that time was the roof without the termites. And some of the other projects, but yes, in the out years, there might be other, if we find
So
out
that
some
would,
other.
that might reduce
that
our
might
fund
change.
balance basically in the outer years.
No, what it might change, for example, is, and again, Ann looks at this all the time, or the public works director looks at this all the time, was, hey, can we reduce the the street and road, $2 million number down to something else? Because, for example, I want to give the example, there's a roof issue at City Hall. Those kind of issues where we didn't think we had an issue at a city facility, but now we do, and we need to do something with it. That's what Ann would look like at when she updates her CIP. What are the needs now? Again, every year, we're basically trying to allocate, it doesn't mean it's gone to a specific project yet.
Yeah.
But we try to allocate it to all of the different programs, revenue, because the intent was not just keep it in a savings account and just watch the fund balance grow, was we wanna make sure it's going to the right place so that Ann didn't spend it on what she needs to spend it on based on the needs of the CIP plan, head and bike master plan, all the plans I can't think of right now, but all those other plans I know we have. That's what she,
So I guess, let me clarify my question. So if in fact in the next couple of years, we are going to have more city projects that we put into that's a part of our expenditure here. Our fund balance would then be reduced, not at what we're forecasting of 3.1. It'll be less than that.
No, he said, what Eric is saying is that 1.996, like in the streets and roads,
Yeah,
might get allocated down to city projects. So it
so
might reduce a little bit.
we're just gonna try and
Well-
keep the 3.1 in general.
Well, I mean, it could go down a little bit,
Well,
but it's
that's what
not
I'm
gonna go down, I mean, it has to be maintained at least 2.5.
Yeah,
But where the money, streets and roads, storm drain, bed and bike are all sort of more general categories. And so some of that money could be put into city project specific, so it would move it around. Wouldn't necessarily reduce the fund balance. It could by a little bit, but it could just get allocated from those general numbers.
yeah, so I guess my question is, on the ending fund balance, are we trying to keep it at 3.1 or as you mentioned, Mayor Nowak, is that we're trying to keep it at 2.5?
We have a minimum of 2.5, we have to keep it at, that
So
was
we have-
decided by council.
Technically, that's 600,000, so that means technically there's 600,000, right, as we had spoken about
That's,
earlier.
so the two
That can be
earmarks, I'll just call them earmarks because it's all just driven by council. Because obviously council could change, to make a different decision. The 2 earmarks that we have in the Measure K fund is a $2.5 million debt reserve. And then what we also created was, council put forward with is $70,000 a year, give or take, for library maintenance in the future. So that's partly built into the 3.2 million, so it's been,
yeah, so it's
Well, the reason
2.5 plus 70.
Yeah,
So we have, 500-some-thousand free in the non-allocated in the general fund.
So where I'm going with this is that of what we talked about earlier about the UAL expenditure and what we're looking at year over year, the 600,000 deficit that seems to kind of be what we're looking at future years. This is a good opportunity to be using Measure K funds, possibly after we go to the public and ask to see whether or not there's an opportunity to. We do have about 600,000 buffer here.
Yeah, there is a little bit of a buffer here, but yeah, we'd have to go to the public.
But again, the buffer, I'll just use the passive, I think it's better. When the city council, when we first went into COVID, again, as I kind of mentioned, HDL was projecting 25% sales tax drop across the board. The major issue at the time for the city, and the mayor talked to this better than I could, was making sure the library was built. So we cut back on everything, all these projects and programs, other than building the library for the most part. Now, obviously, as you saw, was sales tax was actually after that first year, and it didn't drop that much during COVID, was really good years. So what we did was, so we actually had, and this is what allowed us to do some of the things that we did, was we actually had a fund balance of, sorry, right now, I'm gonna misspeak a little bit, $5 million. And we came back to the budget committee and back to council and said, you know, we had really good years with Measure K. And we came forward with various projects and programs that we moved forward with. So for example, the crosswalk stop sign projects near schools. Now that was a project we came forward with. Some additional street and pothole improvement was a little over $1 million was another project we came forward with. We thought it was being fiscally responsible to come forward with the debt service reserve. So for example, this number really did grow. Let's just say it grew to, again, $5 million. Staff would come back to the budget committee and to council and say, hey, beyond just the allocations, this has grown beyond what we originally had thought. Here are, again, there's a list, even in the CIP, the back of the CIP, all the unfunded projects. Did you want to move budget committee / council? Did you want to move forward with some of these other things? So that's one of the things that even if fund balance actually outpaced this level, we would come back to the committee and to council and say, here's some other unfunded projects that we have in the CIP. Did you want to move forward with some of these other projects that we think we could afford?
Okay.
And we've done that a couple of times now with Measure K.
Yeah, because we really ended up, I mean, originally, we had really sort of estimated $2 million a year.
Yeah.
Measure K revenues, and it's done a lot better than we expected, so we've been able to do some things. And some of the things that are iffy are library operations. We historically, we had just paid for Monday hours, and then they came back and said, no, first you have to pay for evening hours, then you had to pay for, Monday hours. It ended up, I think twice as expensive as what we were paying before, because they required us, they were only giving us like package options before we could just add hours. And so we don't, they could change the way they do that again, who knows? So, there's several things in there that can fiddle around as well, so.
So just thank you for that, and I mean, with the information that Eric provided for FY 25-26, or at least this fiscal year, right? We're still ending with 3.1.
Yeah.
Are there, we don't have enough time, obviously, we're now almost at the end of the fiscal year. Are there any other CIP projects that we haven't worked on that we could allocate some funds towards that?
One of the things is the City Hall project with the fountains and the.
Well, we've already allocated 2.5, wasn't it, for the fountain already? And
We had there were some ARPA funds in there.
Yeah.
That were used, not Measure K funds. And so there is some, I believe there's some Measure K funds and there were some ARPA funds all in that. But we may have to relook at that project anyway, because now it's been delayed a year, costs may have gone up. We may have to do some things differently, so that's one of those city projects that we don't have a really good idea at this point what the dollar cost is gonna be. So we're gonna have to meet on that.
so did we already put Measure K funds into that too, though? I thought when
We
we
haven't
looked,
put,
when we
so-
looked at the fountain, it was
so-
2.5, which included ARPA funds and some Measure K.
So we have Measure K funds on that project, we have ARPA funds on that project. I guess what I'll say is, and at some point, I believe that will be coming back to you at some point down the road at as a city council.
Yeah, we're
Well,
gonna,
I mean, is that before the end of this fiscal year? I mean, what I'm
No.
looking at is
No.
really at the,
Before the end of this fiscal year, it looks as though we still have about 600,000 that has not been utilized.
cause we only need to have 2.5, right? That's what we're saying. So it's at 3.1. Can we use the 600,000 for any other CIP projects? Are we able to encumber those funds now for a project that we say, hey, we're planning on working on?
But again, you're not restrictive to the fiscal year, 'cause I'll be honest, there would be enough time to do it by the end of this.
Yeah, of
fiscal
course,
year.
but we only have 27 days or 20,
Yeah.
what, 26 days.
Um, And again,
council too.
so yes, there could be capacity, but there might be other needs that we might come down the road.
And any proposed reallocation of previously allocated dedicated funding by council would require the council to, at least 3 of you or more, hopefully unanimously, to agree that you would unwind the X amount, whatever the amount is, to then reallocate to something else.
Yeah,
Given that we're 26 days in, we only have one more meeting left for the council 2 weeks from now. I think it's highly improbable that that's what's gonna happen.
I mean,
Well, and honestly, I think to some extent, you know, why use it up if we are looking at this pending long-term financial issue? Why spend it on something unless we really need it? Why not keep it there in case we
yeah, well, you would
need to
then,
use it for something else?
then
you
it would
know?
be 1.2 million, right? Wouldn't it be for the following year?
No, that's a fund balance. That's not an annual 600,000. That's the fund balance. So it's
So we just remain the
it's
same.
just, it's a one-time 600,000 that's in the fund balance, 600,000 a year.
Okay.
So yeah, it's not,
Yeah,
it's
I'm
only,
just
it's
thinking
only
of-
one time.
well, yeah, I'm trying to think of other ways of why we wouldn't spend it down to the 2.5, but that's if all we needed to have in our fund balance is 2.5, I think what we should look at is in future years is to actually spend down that amount, whether or not, we go to council with it. But have this discussion during our budget committee meetings and then bring it forth to spend it down all the way to the 2.5.
Well,
And again, it might have to be the UAL expenditure, right, that we need to cover, it could be other areas, but we don't need to keep it 3.1 if it's necessary, we don't need to keep 2.5.
And you don't, and I'll just say that, you can bring it down to, I think it's not quite two, I'll say.
Or what- yeah,
It's 2.6, let's say.
Anyway, so we've left some flexibility, I think, within this, because there's always been something that has come up that we needed Measure K for, that we didn't know at that moment in time. And that's why, for example, when,
Like termites.
but we gotta,
We've had slide failures where truck sites have collapsed.
Yeah.
I mean, there are things it's nice to have some contingency.
a little, and again, when, as I kind of mentioned, when the number becomes, okay, or it's $5 million. We need to spend this on something other than watching the fund balance. Staff has come back to this committee and to council to say, to bring forward, here's the list of all your unfunded project lists. Here's the ones that the public works director would recommend or staff would recommend. Now, council might have a different decision process in which ones they would prefer, but again, that's what we would come back to you with. We saw that number, like, yeah, we do need to spend some of this money on something. I think you would see, we would come back to you and the council and make those kind of, so that you can make that decision. So that, yes, the intent of this is not necessarily, it's not to grow fund balance or just let it sit there.
Yeah.
Is to spend, is to use these funds up for those projects and programs. In regards to, the UAL, that's probably a little bit more down the road in a conversation. As the mayor's saying, yeah, you need to have that with the public, because I know that's not what, now these are all general fund monies. In theory, council, I'll say this, because I say it. Council can direct staff to use it for any governmental service or purpose, but there were, I'll just say, the word I keep using is earmarks. There were earmarks promised that we try to keep to that promise so far.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't even earmarks. It
Yeah.
was basically Measure K funds will not be used for anything except for infrastructure projects and for the library. That was basically what was, road infrastructure and library were basically what was promised when we campaigned on Measure K. And so we've been pretty hard and fast on that, so. We'd have to go back to the public if we varied off. If we veered off that, we'd have to
Yeah.
go back. Now, you see that
But there
we're
are-
not growing the fund balance at all, right?
Right, it's
sitting-
staying, it's.
It's staying flat, so
It's staying flat.
we're spending, we're spending the entire amount going forward every year. It just happens to be where we're sitting today is at 3.1.
Are there any areas in our general fund or revenue that we're receiving that we're using towards city projects in our expenditures in the previous slides that can be utilized in Measure K, for example, streets and roads, city projects, other items there?
Because
You mean
Because when
using,
you look at our revenue and our expenditure, right, our revenue, I think we were looking at 32. And then our expenditure was about a little less than that. So in the expenses, I know a bulk of it is staff and salaries and benefits, and some of it has to do with maintenance or things that are happening within the city that we need to cover. Are there any city projects that we can take from that expenditure and utilize Measure K funds and reduce our expenditure in?
So the general fund, as I kind of mentioned earlier, the general fund itself does not have any projects in it. It has salary and benefit costs and maintenance and repair of facilities. And that was not the intent of Measure K. That wasn't the promise. The
we
promise.
only use it for maintenance for the library.
Yeah, the only thing that we basically, and again, Mary, she came in on this, that.
I led the campaign, so
Yeah.
this one I know too well.
I'm just trying to figure out there's ways that we could move our buckets of funds and
And
things
that's
like
what I
that,
was saying
so.
before, we were able to, we were able to put the library operations in here that came out of the general fund, and that
That's
was
the
a
only
way.
thing.
Well,
That-
yeah, well,
We're very limited on what else we can move from the general fund in here. Yeah, part of that was, for example, that the crossing guards came out of the general fund. So we stopped using the crossing guards and used ARPA and Measure
Yeah.
K to do $1 million in improvements so that we would save that crossing guard money out of the general fund. Same with the operations. So we have done some of that, but it's very limited as to what else we can do.
and then the other piece, again, I know I mentioned earlier, is you used to transfer out anywhere between $500,000 to over $1 million out of the general fund for the street and road projects. We don't do that anymore. So the things that we already have taken things out of the general fund, the
Okay.
things that we could, based on the promises, we've already taken those things out of the general fund.
So there's nothing else that we can.
No, we have gone through that every year for the last couple of years, trying to look for, I mean, even the library operations was sort of, okay. And and we checked with the oversight committee before we did that, cause
Yeah.
operations really wasn't necessarily intended to be part of it, but we sort of had the general category of library, and so library operations made some sense, but otherwise, there's really, and that's why we did the, as we said, the work we did on the roads instead of the crossing guards, we've looked at a couple of those things where we can
So
put it
we've
in the
already
Measure
done an
K.
analysis.
Yeah, we've
basically,
done,
so I-
we look at it we've looked at it pretty carefully the last couple of years. Because we've had the same pressure for a while, so it's, we're fortunate because we have been able to spend more money on streets and roads than we've ever been able to spend.
Yeah.
I mean, we were doing 3 times the amount of paving as Andrew did the other night than we used to do, and it used to be, before SB1, it was $200,000 a year, was pretty much it for paving, and now we do 3 times that amount. So we had 24 zones, and we would do 1 year, which meant every 24 years a road was getting done maybe, so now
And now
able-
we're kind of speeding it up now.
we're speeding it up quite a bit now, and that helps us as well, because by speeding it up, you're not spending as much money either, because you're not waiting as long.
Well, and we're using the tax and people aren't actually.
Yeah, so it's,
It helps the public
Yeah,
too, because at the
yeah.
same time, when you have roads, I think when you're looking at degrading roads, it does cost a person or whoever is driving a vehicle to fix their car, things like that, $700
Yeah,
as
but
an individual.
that
too.
doesn't impact our general.
No, it doesn't impact our general fund, but
I
it
mean,
does
it-
impact the
Oh,
public,
yeah,
so
no,
for us to.
everything we do,
Yeah.
hopefully is impacting the public in a positive sense, but
Yeah.
that, we have, done this, a couple of times on, the road transfers out the library operations, those kinds of things have been, we have done quite a bit of that, and almost as much as we can before we have to go to the public to say, we're gonna do something different, sadly. Not a lot of like capital.
There's not a lot of wiggle room.
There's not a lot of capital, there's no capital money in the general fund being spent that we can shift over to
Yeah,
Measure K, which is primarily capital dollars, so that's a problem.
Oh, we already shifted it.
We already shifted it,
Yeah,
yeah.
we
I
already
mean,
did.
it's
yeah, so
been
you've
shifted.
already done.
We've already
what-
done all that,
yeah.
yeah, we've
Okay.
already done that.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to kind of wanna understand that if there were areas that we could fill the gap.
No, we have plotted through those.
If I can just sound a general theme on that, this council, we highlighted it and we pointed out, the council through historically, I'll say, has been very fiscally, it's the number one goal of the council, the 5 goals, number one is a city that's fiscally sound, financially sound. And I think that these numbers bear that out. We have scrubbed the budgets to figure out what can and cannot go Measure K versus general fund, what other resources do we have outside? And if you look at our expenses historically, we've always kept them in check, we've never exceeded our revenues. Unless there's a down year with revenues that we couldn't predict, but my point is, we have always checked ourselves. What we are unfortunately encountering is something, as Eric alluded to, top of this item, something beyond our control. It's that UAL payment with CalPERS. And that is no one's fault, it is simply, well, you blame the governor, I suppose. He struck this deal back in the day, but bottom line is this.
It was, so back in 2008.
Yeah.
Back in 2008, most of the pensions were overfunded.
Yeah.
And so as a result of that, there was a lot of changes to a lot of contracts across the board. Everybody sort of gave better benefits, better
Yeah.
pensions, right? Locking us into something that we couldn't get out of. And yeah, and then, you know, there's very strict limitations as to what you can do if you're in CalPERS. We have some benefits that we never did, retiree medical, which is costing, I don't know, Concord's in deep trouble. Antioch's looking at a $58
Yeah,
million
well,
budget.
CBR
deficit.
rates are, I mean, they go up year over year, and so. then-
Well, we
yeah.
don't have
We
to
don't
worry
have
about
that,
any of it,
which
so we
is
don't have
why,
to,
yeah.
we don't have to worry about that at all, so we're very fortunate in that aspect that we never did any of that, and so, you know, and when good old CalPERS, you know, they had some assumptions that they couldn't meet. And those were factored in, you know, it resulted in this unfunded liability, and so if they had started off basically in 2008 with different assumptions, more reasonable assumptions, this would have been spread out over a longer period of time. You know, before PEPRA, there was spiking, all sorts of issues on, you know, on pension stuff that had to be totally reformed. But, you know, we ended up where we ended up, and sadly, everybody's in the same boat except for those cities that don't have police forces.
Or that aren't members of CalPERS, but that's a whole other
That-
matter. I
yeah,
don't
that's
think we want
another-
to associate with, and by the way, I know Erica said it, we'd have to write a huge check to even
Yeah.
try to contemplate, but then also have a system ready to go and it's, I think it's
We'd have
super
to,
helpful.
in order to stop CalPERS, we'd have to write a check for $160 million.
Right, yeah, I remember that presentation, which we don't have, actually.
No, we're not even close.
We don't even have that to kind of check for them.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I just wanted to say, again, I think that what we're trying, and I think the picture that Eric is trying to paint in this long-term financial forecast is we have been good stewards as a city of our dollars, and we've been fiscally sound. And council has followed its promise on Measure K and has paid for what it said would. And so I think there's a track record certainly there. What we cannot, and what we're trying to grapple with and figure out is what do we do about this UAL? Council has recently established a trust fund, great. So we have that
Yeah.
modest amount, but amount nonetheless growing. We're trying to continue to look at ways in which we can operate efficiently. But as Eric highlighted and as the long-term financial forecast highlights, and as he highlighted in the slides, there are gonna be some decisions we have to make, and there are gonna be some conversations and the council's gonna have to undertake
Yeah.
soon. You know, in the coming years, because you can't avoid the UAL payment. So.
Yeah.
I only say that kind of in, go ahead, sorry.
Well,
The only thing I say, well, no, if CalPERS gets 20% actual year-over-year returns, then yes, you can avoid.
Oh,
the
there's
UAL.
that.
in this environment, that's not happening, I hate to break the news to you, but.
I'll just say that there is a scenario where you do get out of the UL pit. Now, how realistic is a different question.
well, I mean, again, I know Sue, you, Mayor Nowak, you mentioned that, you know, we might not get much out of looking at a contingency plan for all the departments, but I think that is worthwhile to take a look at. Because we do have to wait before we can go to the public about Measure K funds, things like that.
Well, I think we have to.
And also look at our attrition rate as well, because we know what our attrition rate, I mean, generally speaking, most most government entities or any business is about 10% attrition rate. So if we look at that and but it still shows that we have a deficit of about like 600,000. And so that is another reason why I bring up the contingency plan, and maybe there are ways that we can think about how we can consolidate, or improve our efficiencies.
Yeah,
So,
just having gone through this several
Right.
times over the
I
last
know.
11 years,
yeah,
there's not gonna be much. I mean, Ethan hasn't backfilled his position, so he's been sitting without an assistant city manager for quite some time. As he said, Ann's job was consolidation, and then actually, so I am concerned that hanging our hat on a contingency plan is gonna be concerning. It's gonna be cutting public safety. Cause I don't see much other area that I'm aware of, having spent 11 years at this, that we have much area for.
have we looked at?
We have done this several times over the years, because we have been in positions where we've had to say, okay, we might have a tough year next year, so let's take a look at it, let's freeze some positions. We have done this several times over the last 11 years where we've had to take a look at that.
Yeah.
We as a result, when the head of planning, Greg Foos, left, we didn't, Troy just filled his spot, we didn't backfill that one, we backfilled with lower level
Yeah.
planning people. Same thing happened in engineering.
Or
when-
consulting work, as Eric mentioned, where you don't have to actually pay benefits and things like that.
Yeah, but that ends up being, that can be costly. For example, Lafayette and Danville, right, they hire the sheriff's department and they pay for that instead, so they don't have a UAL. But the UAL county flows through into the payment, so they don't have it sitting on their balance sheet, but the payment goes through because the county still has the UAL and they have to pay it, and so it flows through, so it's a very, it's a different way of looking at it. We've looked at that before, back in 2000, when I just got on here. We were having, our roads were getting worse and worse because we could not keep up in our infrastructure. And that was one of the reasons for Measure K, is we were getting, everything was.
No,
getting
I
worse.
hear you.
And then we had the same thing when we were negotiating with the police at one point, that we were gonna have to, in order to give them the raises they want, we were gonna have to do some layoffs. And so we've been through that a couple of times, and I just have to say, probably in my 11 years, this is probably the leanest staff we have ever had. And so I just want you to be realistic, that there's probably not a lot in the contingency that we could do without really cutting service to the public that they would notice.
Right.
And that's my concern. I don't want, until we have to, I don't wanna cut, I don't
Well,
wanna
we don't wanna
give the
cut
service
services
worse
to the
for-
public, but
Right,
but we do, if it comes down to this, where we are at a deficit, that would ultimately then impact the services.
I would prefer to go to Measure K.
Well,
and
I would
cut
prefer-
services drastically.
Well, I think Measure K is a good opportunity
Yeah.
and a good option, but I don't think that we should just put all our eggs in one basket. I think we should also look at other opportunities and areas of looking at our contingency, like I said, that is not something that we are guaranteed that the public would approve, right? That is just something that we are saying, we would like to go to the public with this, perhaps they will approve it. At this point in time, we should at least just do an analysis.
I got quick numbers, 90% retention rate, 10% attrition, which includes retirements. Last year alone, we had 12 people leave, we had 6 retirements, 4 resignations, 2 dismissals. So that's just a quick hit from Erica. But just to say, yeah, we're consistent with 10% is consistent.
And our biggest concern is public safety. We have quite a few officers that could retire.
We do.
Very experienced
Yeah.
We
officers.
have a very experienced officer.
That could retire,
They
and so
certainly can.
we will have to probably higher level police come in.
Yeah.
To replace them, because we have at least, 3 or 4 at least?
At least
maybe
3 that I
even
know
more.
of that are
Yeah, right
are-
there,
decorated,
Yeah.
long tenure.
yes. And
Officers.
so, we have just gotten back to two motors.
Yeah,
We've just gone back to 2 motors. We haven't had 2 motors in ages. We haven't been able to do parking enforcement. We did
yeah,
not.
there are a lot of, yeah,
Yeah,
there are a lot of
So-
operational
Yeah, I hear you.
yeah.
considerations.
So I just want you to be realistic on a contingency. There isn't much to
Well, I mean,
cut.
if we
I
are-
just wanna be,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just wanna be honest with you.
Right.
There's not much to be done
I think we
in that
should.
area. That's why I'm just giving you a heads up that you can request that, but you're not gonna find much having
Yeah, I would
been
like to. request
really
it just-
stingy about
Yeah,
our finances.
just cause it
so.
looks like, you know, if we can look at a contingency plan, I think it was 600,000, that's the average rate, Eric, is that? what we're saying?
No, that was the estimate for this year, there's no,
That's just
there's
the
no
number.
necessarily.
But previous
average.
year, what was the previous year?
Well, no, we're to the good of
Oh,
one
we
point
were to
nine
the
million.
Yeah,
Okay.
And the year before that, we're to the good of over $1 million, for the exact number.
Yeah.
So there's no average of, hey, we're in the deficit 600. We were in
Last
twenty
year
twenty-two, we had a deficit of 100,000. But most of that was because of the investment, the counting investment adjustment I have to make every year.
and last year, I think we were projecting a deficit of 1 million and we ended up positive 1.8.
1.8, I saw that.
So that was a big swing. The year before, I don't think it was that much of a swing, but it was a swing to the positive as well. So if I recall
No,
my
yeah, so
numbers
the last 2
correctly.
years, we've been over $1 million.
And
The only
each of
year
them
that we
too good.
weren't was 2022, or when I started.
We're down.
But the
2022,
UA
that was
expenditures
a little under
continuing to
100,000.
grow, so I mean, I
Yeah, the UAL, and
Yeah,
that's the problem, is
that's
the
the
UAL tends to, is tend to grow, but we have how many spots do we have frozen
9.
right now?
In police. Or just in
How,
general.
yeah, how many
In
Police,
general,
two.
just two.
two vacant positions?
No,
No,
we have-
frozen.
Frozen?
We have a
Frozen.
police officer and a CSO position frozen.
Frozen.
And how
They
many,
used to be higher, our council reduced that number slightly.
Yeah.
okay, and then how many vacant positions do we have right now, besides the 2 that has been frozen? Or maybe we could talk about this offline and maybe like have a contingency plan, like kind of show currently what our current state is right now, how many staff, how much, can I speak now, it's getting late, how many full-time staff we have, what the vacancies are right now, what positions are frozen at this point in time, if staff could provide that
That was
information,
that
that'd
as
be.
part of the budget.
The big part, yeah, again, we can start putting together some of the thoughts or things we'd like to do as we get through the budget process.
Yeah,
That's a little bit, I mean, the ideas are great, but a little bit outside the long-term financial.
Okay.
So I'm not saying we can't do that, but for this purpose.
Yeah.
Again, that's why we're like it's to get those thoughts and ideas. What the actual, whether it's vacancy, attrition rates, we can provide that down the road as
When you get to the budget.
as we get into the budget process for the next biennial.
and the contingency plan.
So we're just gonna, we're just approving this updated long-term financial plan to go to council.
Council for discussion, right? Or are you saying that it's gonna move to just consent? Because I think it would be helpful to just hear from other council members. that-
Well, I don't think it will go into consent.
Okay.
No, this
No,
one,
no,
this one's a
this
consent,
never goes
yeah.
to consent, yeah, no.
Council still has to
Receive and accept.
receive and
then
accept
can
and
I ask for that 5-minute recess right
Yeah,
now? Okay,
as soon as the mayor takes any public comment,
oh,
I'm
yeah,
more than
public
welcome
comment,
to
Okay.
take a relief break.
okay, yeah, we can
please.
take a break now. Yeah, we're on break.
Oh, no, I thought we were just gonna move forward with this first before we take a
Oh.
break.
No, public comment, just
Yeah.
approve
Public,
this.
yeah.
Yeah,
Public comment and then, okay,
Motion.
motion to approve, review of proposals,
Second, all those in favor?
review update of long-term financial plan. I guess,
I just say so moved.
so moved. Well, Jan
It's
is,
much easier.
our city attorney said that she would appreciate it if we would say the whole thing rather, so.
I've been ignoring her for
So-
11 years, so it's easy for me to.
Yeah, well, I think it helps to also for the public to hear that. Okay, are we on
Anyway, we're
recess
on,
now?
we're on recess.
Okay, perfect, thank you, sorry, I do need to use.
Can you turn off the mics?
Okay, next item is review of fiscal year 25-26 budget adjustments.
So this is, we do a review of the year that we just had as well as some proposed changes for the coming year. A lot of those actually we covered in the long-term financial plan. So some of this is gonna be duplicate. What you're seeing, the only thing that is updated is that I've obviously put in some pictures of some of the events that we've had at the city. Obviously, the city council, as I mentioned earlier, approved the long-term financial plan. Accepted the long-term financial plan last May. The biennial budget was adopted a year ago, and we spent time talking about the long-term financial plan update, which we'll bring to the city council in a couple of weeks. It's always looks much bigger on my computer than it does. Just from a very high level, you can see that we have the actuals for 23-24. What was adopted in the biennial budget, as well as the estimate that we have now, as well as the adopted for 25-26 and the proposed provision, and obviously the differences for each. As I mentioned in the previous presentation, a little over $31.3 million in revenues a year ago. Obviously, our biggest revenue generators are sales tax and property tax, both at 34% and 29%. Property tax this current year, as I kind of mentioned, we don't know what some of the supplementals are until we actually get them. So it looks a little bit better than what HDL projected by $26,000. I'll take anything over the budget.
So you're gonna be happy about that projection.
Sales tax is
Less than.
as what you heard from HDL a couple of months ago with their projection. 10.5 is the revised estimate for the current year, and then $10.8 million is the revised estimate for next year. So that's obviously a reduction of $300,000 in the current year, and then about the same for next fiscal year. Property tax, the HDL revision, sorry, that slight revision downwards to by about 35,000. I'm gonna be honest, once we know it gets supplementals, that might be a wash. I mean, it might not be a negative 35,000, but that's what we currently have. For 25-26. So that the overall change, there's some, just some other slight improvements in taxes and assessments from business license. But the net delta for the current year is $200,000 less than what was budgeted. And then next year is about $373,000. Well, that being sales tax. Again, just taking a look at sales tax, we would take about 1 cent for every dollar we receive. And this is takes a look at where it's been, close to $11 million in the past, 10.9 last year. 10.9, 2023, sorry. 2024 was 10.6 million. The estimated again for HDL 10.5 for the current year. And then we're assuming some return to normalcy, $10.8 million. Some of that was, we did have, I think they were hoping for some of our retailers to return back to normal. We know that we have some, we think we had some better gas tax numbers than we did in the current year. So again, they're assuming a little over about 2.5% growth. Third year, but again, that's lower than the originally adopted budget of $1 million. Property tax, again, this is normally grows with CPI at a cap of 13 and about 2%. 2023, 8.7, and about 9.1 last year. A little less this year, about a little over $9 million. Again, it's that supplemental. It's really the sales, home sales within the city. With rising interest rates, we just knew that was going to drop, and that's where you're seeing why we're not hitting 9.1 million as you saw in the previous years. It's because of that. The normal property tax that we get via Prop 13, that's coming in as expected. Again, the revised HDL is just slightly lower than the originally adopted by about $26,000. As I like to mention, we get about 5.7 cents of every dollar for property tax revenue. And again, on this chart, I know it's a little hard to read. This is pretty much set in stone. For anyone to get more, because I know councils and other public like to ask, like, hey, why can't we just,
Yeah,
instead of
somebody
5.7?
asked me that, I was like, you'd have to get somebody else to give it up.
Yeah, so you have to,
Good luck with that.
and, yeah, for them to give it up, what are you giving back?
Yeah.
And it's mainly the schools that get most of the money, obviously, for people's property tax. Again, TOT, we get 10 cents for every dollar, it's the largest one, obviously, as I kind of mentioned in the previous presentation, it's just been hovering right around 3.2 million. The 2023, 2.2, 2024, 2.2, the estimate right now is again 2.2. Yeah, I've left the revision alone, I know that TA or Tourism Improvement District continues to work hard at trying to bring in visitors into Pleasant Hill and get people to stay in our hotels. So I've left the projection alone, but really, we've been recovering right around 2.2 million for the last several years.
And do we,
That would be good to grow our revenue and find ways to work
well,
with.
that's what this
Yeah,
Pleasant Hill's
to
supposed to be
work with
there. But their whole goal is to heads and beds, right? But
Yeah,
do we get TOT if they stay after 30 days?
No.
So we don't get that's one of the other problems with the residence hotels. They stay longer than 30 days, they don't pay TOT.
Hmm.
So when you have people coming in to work at the refinery for a couple months,
then we don't get the TOT
we don't
on
get
that.
TOT on that. So that's part of an issue of our hotels being residential hotels, or extended stay hotels, I should say.
Is that based on the days in a specific, I'm gonna get granular here, in a specific room? Where then, or is it just in general, the amount, the duration of the stay?
It's duration of the
regardless
stay,
of-
duration of
yeah,
stay.
duration of stay.
Okay,
Now,
so I'm just thinking of like, maybe,
and I'll say this for the public, I appreciate all of you that stay more than 30 days, because you're probably still spending money in Pleasant Hill. on
Yeah.
right,
restaurants
local
and food.
businesses and things like that,
But yeah. You're
We
correct,
do,
yeah.
but it does not help our TOT.
It's not-
Yeah. More people that stay longer than 30 days, so.
I guess the biggest thing with TOT, just to highlight, put a fine point on it, we get all 10 cents. We
Yeah.
only get a fraction of the sales tax. It's a bigger pot,
yeah, it is a bigger part.
but this is, we
But
get
we're
all
not
10.
increasing it.
No,
at
we
this
get all
point in
10
time.
cents on this, so that's the attraction to a TOT.
So yeah, I think there was conversation with Visit Pleasant Hill on how to understand when the vacancies are in the specific periods for each of the hotels and looking at their quarterly reports in that respect. And then trying to fill the gaps there with maybe some sorts of events that we may have here or near our other neighboring cities when they have events to get Visit Pleasant Hill to kind of work with the neighboring cities to get people to stay here, right? Cause that would be an opportunity for us to get more on the TOT.
Yeah, they're,
So we look
I
at
don't-
their quarterly report and we see, okay, let's just say January to March, right? They basically have vacancies there, neighboring cities are having events. That's how, I mean, again, that's Visit Pleasant Hill that would do the outreach and things like that, but I think that would be helpful to at least look at their quarterly report to see where those vacancies are, how to fill the gaps, giving us opportunities to gain this 10%.
I think there's some opportunities with Visit Pleasant Hill because the two people that are doing the marketing don't live here.
Yeah.
The main salesperson lives in Southern California. So they are relying on the hotels themselves to know about local events. And
Yeah.
that's not necessarily what managers of hotels do.
Yeah.
So this is a ongoing concern that has been expressed to Visit Pleasant Hill on this topic. And it has been expressed before.
So
There's
may I
concern
ask a
about that.
question?
You can call
Are
me
we-
Sue, it's
are-
alright, I don't do this
Sue-
formal stuff.
So are we obligated to stay with Visit Pleasant Hill? Not to say that we wouldn't.
So we have, I
I'll-
will give you the rundown on Visit.
I'll just say we're slightly going off agenda.
Sorry,
Yeah,
yeah,
sorry.
okay.
We can talk about that later, but
Well, I mean, it just on the lines of TOT sales, and so that's where
we do,
kind of-
we, you know, we're gonna continue to work with Visit Pleasant Hill to try to get them more aware of local activities that are going on, to bring more people in. There was something that was up here, some sporting event, that all the parents were required to stay in Pleasant. And that was a shame that
Yeah.
happened, and so it has been discussed and it will continue to be discussed with Visit Pleasant Hill.
Yeah, cause I know that Walnut Creek recently had their cancer walk too, and you know, there's opportunity if neighboring cities are having events.
Well, they all have
I mean, they all have,
they have all
Yeah.
TIDs as well, so.
they do too, but I'm
Yeah.
just saying the
Walnut Creek is-
overflow, we can take
Yeah.
in the overflow.
So this is jumping to the expenditures, like, this is the slide I thought I had in the previous presentation, and it wasn't this one. Now, salary and benefit, I mean, total cost up is about $30 million in 23-24, 31.8 the estimate for the current fiscal year right now. And then almost 35 million in 25-26. As you can see, the main change, you can see the delta of about 2.2 million under budget. The main change of that is salary and benefits under budget by about 1.5 million. This is where you're really seeing those vacancies that we talked about, whether it's PD, whether it's ACM, all the positions that weren't filled during the course of the year. This is where you're seeing we're under budget. Professional services, it just depends on, again, what kind of services. Some of this is actually related to the city attorney.
Yeah, I was about to say, our city attorney falls under this, cause she's not salaried, she's contracted.
So we assume a certain amount every year, and it really just depends on how many hours the city attorney actually works for us, and she's not an employee of the city. Or is it?
Okay.
Okay.
I was gonna say, may I ask how many hours have we allocated in general, or have we seen year over year for the city attorney?
You know, it varies, you know, when we had lawsuits involved and she has to oversee some things like that, it can go up. When we have more
I was gonna say for districting, we had a lot
districting,
more.
we had a lot
legal
of
services.
legal services in that situation. So it depends on, I mean, this year I think we've been pretty calm, haven't we? Yeah, okay, sorry.
Well, I mean,
We got a month ago, but
Yeah, but
in
it's good to
general,
know.
so it depends on what's going on in the world around us.
I don't wanna say she, the city attorney, the main reason for that, I mean, there's other things, so for example, the other reason that you're seeing that we're under budget is. One of the things that we did in this budget was we brought back some of the IT contracted services budget into the general fund, because what, in the old days, what we would do was. We would transfer out to the capital IT fund. But some of those things aren't technically capital related, they're ongoing IT needs, so we brought some of that back, so I know we're under budget right now on some of those line items. I'll be honest, I talked with our IT manager, some of that savings might be going away a little bit, just because I think we have some expenses that we charge to the other fund that need to be back into the general fund. But that's what you're seeing, again, but the bulk of it really is, again, if we have vacancies in the city, that's the bulk of that 2.2 million. And this makes it a little bit more clear when we look at that, the budget compared to actual or estimates. Is when you see, for example, public safety, we're under budget by $760,000. The bulk of that is because we have, as you saw on the previous slide, is mainly due to salary benefit positions and vacancies within the city. As we've already talked about, the city manager's office, the vacancy there. So most of what you see is vacancy. Oh, I'm sorry, same thing, community development, public works. There's two reasons for community development, public works. One is we've had vacancies within that department throughout the year, especially the maintenance department.
Mhm.
Well, I take back, as well as engineers. The other reason is, when we actually adopted the budget, one of the things that, Ann has been, or the public works director has been pushing for, is to allocate as much as we possibly can to projects and programs that we can. So for example, if it's a Measure J funded project and we can allocate salary benefits there, she does. If it's a gas tax project and we can allocate our engineering staff to those projects, she does. That's one of the things that she's been pushing for, is to make sure that all of our engineers, if they can be as chargeable as they can to other funding sources, and that's what she's been pushing for. And some of the savings that you're seeing here is because we're not charging the general fund for them, we're charging whatever project that they're currently working.
That's what I mentioned in the CIP, other projects, other sources, that's exactly right. So we were talking about what are.
So salary
Yet
support
another.
is going into through different funding sources.
Correct, non-general fund.
And in 25-26, the differences that you really see is we're under budget, or sorry, we're proposing changes by about 200,000. This was, as you kind of saw in the long-term financial plan, we basically have seen 16% year over year, I mean, on average growth over 10 years of insurance costs, which includes general liability and workers' comp. Workers' comp gets allocated to the different departments. This is the first year.
Yeah, I was about to say.
26 days
Yeah.
Well, I know, I guess I could change the premiums in a few days, but this is the first year that we have actually seen a decrease in our premiums by just a little bit. I'll take it.
Anything,
And the
if it's not
reason,
going up, that's good.
it's not going up, and the reason for that is partly thanks to HR, is our just like for our own property insurance or vehicle insurance, some of it's based on your actual experience. If I get in a car accident, obviously my rates are going up.
Yeah.
So we've had some old claims, both in general liability and works comp, that finally had fallen off. So now our claim history looks a lot better if you just go back the last 3 or 4 years. What that helps you with is, again, just like your auto insurance. Well, if you don't have any accidents, normally your premiums get better. That's what we're kind of seeing right now when it comes to insurance for us. Because the overall average increase for our JPA as a pool was about, I think about 8% increase overall on average. Well, we were actually able to get a slight decrease again because of our past experience. So that's really what you're seeing as on the proposed revision side, the decrease is really because of that insurance. The increase obviously, unfortunately, CalPERS in 2023 got a 5.8% return, which is great, but unfortunately, when you assume 6.8, it means you've got to pay more the following year. As I kind of mentioned, I think in the staff report along the financial plan, I can't remember if I said in this one as well. CalPERS got a 9.3% return in 2024. That we won't know what that does until later this summer, early fall. Again, whatever that number is, or that dollar amount is, doesn't kick in until 26, 27. There's always a 3-year lag for when CalPERS rate of return and actual impact financially.
Have we heard their decisions on revised assumptions?
No, I sat through a WebEx. It was basically to tell us that they're doing it, which I tried to do.
So we haven't heard yet.
No, so the next major, I'll say this, their board is supposed to, in theory, if they go according to their schedule, they would adopt whatever assumption changes in November, December of this calendar year.
I knew it was this year sometime, I just didn't know when.
And in theory, whatever they decide, it could kick in 26, 27, or 27, 28.
They can't buy down the rates again, though, right? With a 9.8, that's not enough to buy down a rate.
No, when they came out, the original, I'm not forgetting what it was called. They originally had a policy that basically says, when we have really good years, we can buy down the discount rate. 9.3 is actually enough to buy down,
Really?
under the original policy.
Oh,
Under the original policy, 9.3 was actually enough to buy down the discount rate slightly. Because they knew that they were doing the asset liability management process that they're going through
Right.
currently, and because they knew a lot of cities did not like what they did last time around,
Yeah.
they left it, they basically approved, like, we're not gonna change the
Okay.
discount rate this time around because they amended the policy for this current time around, because of the ALL process.
okay, because I was at the League of Cities when they announced that. Oh, the lineup at the mic that day was not good. That was an ugly session.
I mean, the only thing I think I asked them at the beginning of this calendar year, because they had not adopted they had not revised the policy yet, was it's because in the old days it was an automatic trigger. There was no go back to the
Right.
CalPERS board, like, hey, do we really want to reduce the discount rate?
It was just automatic.
It was automatic. If it hit whatever percentage, if it hit over the percentage, it was an automatic decrease in the discount rate. All I remember, my only public comment to CalPERS was at the time was, hey, can you just go back to the board? Just make sure that you actually really want to do this and it's not an automatic trigger.
Yeah.
And that's what they did. They went back to the board and they said, we're not gonna do it this time around. Oh, that's good. I think we kind of covered this already. The bulk of our cost is obviously public safety, 41%, and public works and community development is about 19%. Again, I don't know why I keep throwing my department into this, but my department, 3 different divisions,
watch out, no
and risk
race for you
management is equal to the BUA basically. That's how large it becomes, or large it is, I should say. We've already seen the slides, I won't cover this again. That's really it, because we've already covered most of this in the long-term financial plan update. It really is those changes to what HDL provided us in property tax and sales tax for the next year. As well as the new insurance premiums bringing slightly down based on our modifications.
So HDL included Crumbs and the Royale in their revised estimates for it?
Well, the one that you got 2 months ago, probably not, so if it comes
No,
in
yeah,
a little
'cause
bit better.
I think it was
then-
Okay.
behind when she had presented that.
So it may not, Crumbs or Royale might not be in those projections yet,
Okay,
but that's what they normally revise them. Well, I know they revise them more than once, but for budget purposes, they revise them when you receive that presentation.
okay. All right, so we might do a little bit better there. Okay.
I did have a question, when I looked at the packet where it says, salary and benefits proposed adjustment is 83,000 decrease, is that again due to?
All that's the workers' comp. So for example, for
Workers'
workers' comp is that insurance piece that's allocated to all the different departments based on staffing. And it's taking that, we know that those premiums are coming down, that's where you're seeing the decrease.
Okay.
And that's it, other than staff's recommendation to bring this forward to the council for hopefully approval.
Yeah,
Okay, motion to approve review of fiscal year.
2025, 2026 budget adjustments. I'm gonna say so moved the next one, just to people.
don't hear me change, I'm gonna do so moved, I have too many meetings. Okay, I'll second that, all in favor?
Aye.
You see the resolutions you have to read out for MTC, you would just go so moved because they are long and convoluted.
Well, and council, obviously, we will have a resolution for these items, just for committees, normally we do that. Not approving a resolution.
Okay, master fee schedule.
Thank you for hanging in there, getting through this.
I can stop talking for the next item and hand this over to Ross.
Well, that's why Ross has been here all the time. Ross, you should have asked to go first.
Yeah. Ross is like, great,
All right, Ross,
why
you're
didn't you
up.
put me in the front?
Compared to Eric's minutes, mine should be fairly light. So yes, I'm here to present the proposed fiscal year 2025-2026 master fee schedule. And for a little bit of background, the fees in the master fee schedule, they're established to provide full cost recovery of city provided services. And there are a list of some of the fees that are in the master fee schedule. Over the past 20 or so years, we've had two major updates to the master fee schedule. One in June of 2003, fee levels were adjusted based on a comprehensive fee study, and a resolution is established authorization by council to adjust fees annually based on a CPI to keep up with inflation. And then last year, we had another fee study done, and there were significant increases to numerous fees as well. It's kind of a reset of the fees to appropriate levels. And for the current update for 2025-2026, we're proposing a return to relatively moderate fee increases based mostly on the CPI. As far as notice to the public, staff had a notice of the public hearing published on May 21st and May 28th of each month of the Council Times. We also reached out to the BIA, the Building Industry Association, as requested via email, and the hearing is set for the June 16th council meeting. And so the update is based on a 2.7% CPI factor, and that's based on the state of California's published year-over-year percent change at February 2025 for the San Francisco, Oakland, Hayward region. And as mentioned, most of the fees are increased by the CPI factor. Some of the fees are determined in alternative methods. Those may be the building, engineering, and planning fees, or some of them anyway. So onto the updates. So we've had a few additions in the engineering section. We added a storm drain medallions fee. That's part of the installation condition for developers at each inlet site. And then we brought back the compost bins fee. We removed it I think a couple of schedules ago, but we brought it back, and there's different rates for residents and non-residents alike. Under the city clerk and city
Now,
managers.
would non-residents be commercial? I mean, because everybody else is residents, right? And
I believe. Yeah, I'll have to get more clarification on that, but yeah, they added secondary look
So the compost bins are every single resident would have that cost associated, right?
if they wanted to purchase them, yes.
Most, I mean, I'll be honest, I know for, well, since I live in one, like townhouses don't have a compost bin.
Huh.
Right, because they don't have anything to compost. They have no place to put compost.
Yeah.
And so this is not recycling. This
No,
is
yes.
compost. They have no place.
I
to
have
put
compost at home.
We don't, at least I don't, at least my
Oh, you have a
compost does
compost
not have
bin? Yeah.
compost.
I have a compost.
Oh, what do you do with compost?
Put things in there that
No, what do you do when
Oh,
it's
with
full?
Republic comes and takes it.
Oh, so you put it in your green bin?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I know that my compost currently does not.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well,
Not everybody would have it, so.
Oh, we compost ours.
Oh.
So we put, stuff in the green bin, but then we have compost.
Or your dirt.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I-
my
I- yeah, I
husband
know.
has 2 compost rotating bins. and
No, I
stuff.
put everything just in the.
Oh, yeah, okay, got it.
And then under the city clerk, city manager section, under the advice of the city attorney, was to add a filing fee for initiative measures. It's basically a $200 administrative fee for processing the paperwork when a citizen wants to, get signatures to petition a measure to be put on the ballot. And then for additional notes, the engineering department has a traffic mitigation fee, which may receive periodic updates, and it may be an off-cycle update. I know we're not doing that at this time, but the engineering department is gonna review that fee and see if it needs a recalculation.
So the public works worker will maybe coming back sometime in the next fiscal year with that.
Okay.
Yeah, go to council, yes. Okay, and some of the more substantial changes under the citywide section for the credit card and electronic payment processing fee. Additional language is added to provide flexibility to adjust the fee off cycle, because that's subject to the merchant services provider. And currently, it's a 3% fee on all credit card transactions. And then under the police section for concealed weapons permits, both the application and renewal fees have substantially increased. Our PD staff found that our fees were grossly being undercharged for those types of services. And based on a look at the actual time it takes to process these items and the fully loaded cost of an assigned officer, and not including managerial review, they believe that these fees are fair, fairly set at this time.
So just about the credit card, because I'm looking at the updated version, it also says a minimum fee of $2 for all transactions, subject to the so
Yes.
is that based on that language right there where you say by the merchant services provider with proper notice? So there will be a minimum fee of $2.
All transactions, yeah, have a $2 fee, even if it's like $1.
Okay.
No, but even, so with the, and it's been, my challenge the last couple of years, well, one, due to one of our our business license system, was talking to merchant services, and basically, the way that they're always designed is, we can change our fees with the 30-day notice.
Hmm.
And what I can't do is change what we charge them with only 30-day notice. I can't charge the public within 30 days, I can't get it to council fast, to the budget committee and or council fast enough based on their change. The request I ask is, okay, I get it, you can charge, I understand that you have to charge more, but can you just charge me 3% and we pay the difference? There is no mechanism for that. They basically say you have to pay, if we're charging, and I'm making this up, 3.5%, you have to pay 3.5%.
Yeah.
Now, the customer has to pay 3.5% now, you can't make up the difference later. And even with our current provider, who we have a better relationship with, says, yeah, Eric, I mean, we have a better relationship, so maybe we can make some things work, but it is 30-day notice, we can change your fees, within 30-day notice.
Okay, and I said this was gonna be a quick presentation. One thing I did want to add is that we didn't do fiscal impact analysis yet. We're gonna provide a number at the council meeting. But last year, we estimated, between $250,000 to $300,000 in total revenue increase. We haven't confirmed that yet. We're still getting our numbers together for last fiscal year.
And then the other thing I'll add to last year, remember, and that was, if you may recall, we did adjust fees, on average, slightly higher than CPI, especially,
Yeah, because we did the whole,
we did the whole master fee
Yeah,
schedule,
yeah.
so it is not going to, I can say this now, it will not be as high as it was last year, because yes, we reviewed all of the fees. And some of them were much higher than the cost of living adjustment, and I'm trying to remember, I want to say it's 2.5%, I know we had it up earlier. It was much higher than on average.
and we had more new fees last year too as a result. We had a handful of new.
We had a handful of new fees, but it was more of adjusting for some of our current fees that were higher than they were previously, just like you're seeing with the concealed, similar to what you're seeing with the concealed weapon fee here.
It's like a major reset.
Yeah. Yeah, last year.
Well, thanks for doing legwork before I got it. No, but no, jokes aside, I think it is important to, you did an update to the fees, because we can't keep charging the same amount when things are going up, and that's awesome.
Well, that's when we did that was
Yeah.
why we did the major reset last year, because
Right.
we had just been going up CPI, and so we really had to go in and take a look at whether we were recovering costs. You can't make a profit,
Yeah.
but you can recover costs,
yeah,
and so
at
we
least
did the
cover.
major reset last year to do that, but that's expensive as well, you can't, we had to hire outside people to do that, so you don't wanna do that every year, but
Right, of course.
so this year is just, hopefully last year did a good job of resetting and going with CPI for a little while before we have to do it again.
Well, we'd have to do it again anyway, right, cause it would not in the near future, but when that changes.
And they're recommended, yeah, definitely
Yeah.
more frequent than 20 years. I think it was 5 years that they were recommending,
Yeah,
every 5
Every
years or so.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
You should have went in the beginning.
I know, for Ross.
I learned that.
But you got to eat some, you got to eat some Starbread, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there you go, okay. Alright,
Okay.
any other questions?
No other further questions. Motion to approve proposed fiscal year 2025.
You said you were gonna do so move.
Oh,
Let's go
sorry, motion so
Oh,
moved.
sorry.
Oh, public
Oh,
comment.
public comment.
Thank you.
I
I
love
was,
it.
I was so good at, I was so good at that this morning and because we had a remote speaker, so I had to ask it every single time this morning. I did.
Okay, so moved.
Thank you. Second. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Setting date of next budget committee.
Always the interesting part. Now,
And back-
historically, we have, I will say this, historically, that's something was, we have skipped this meeting, or we have tentatively scheduled this meeting, but we have also skipped this meeting, because normally July is a quiet month. So normally we have scheduled it, but I guess I would say, don't be surprised if it gets canceled.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I don't have a kid in school, but I know school now, July is the month where everybody takes vacations because kids are all back in school in August. So I'm okay if you wanna skip July and then just go to August.
Yeah, I'm okay with that too.
If you don't need us for anything.
Well, I guess I'd still like to.
But we have to
tentatively
schedule it for,
I'd like to tentatively schedule dates just in case something comes up that I'm not thinking about or in a different department.
When
Can
would
we
you
do-
like-
the third week. I can't do first or second week, but the third week and onwards, fiscal. So maybe Thursday, July 17th, your schedule.
And I'm gonna be honest, I'm literally on a cruise in any staff reports, I know I won't get back in time to be able to do that week.
Okay, so you have to
24th?
go the following week.
Yeah, we're looking at the following.
Following week.
Monday, the 21st.
I can do Monday or Tuesdays, pretty,
Tuesdays are tough for me. Mondays are.
Mondays are okay.
Right.
As long as I can work around Ethan's schedule.
I will be in Greece on that day, so.
So I don't have to worry about your
Yeah,
schedule.
thank you for the consideration though, but I will.
Have a great
Okay.
time.
Thank you.
That's canceled. Oh, I have something that morning, hold on. Oh, that's, okay, I have a 9:30 on that Monday.
I can do the afternoon.
Okay, what's your schedule? I can move that Monday morning meeting around, it's just my check-in with MTC people.
Oh, okay.
So I can move around them,
Yeah, we
depending
can.
on what your schedule
What,
is.
whatever
9:30 is
works,
fine.
work.
Can Can we do 9? 9:30 is like the middle of the day for me.
10? I can't do 9, I can't,
Oh.
yeah, that's,
Okay, well, we can do 10, because
Okay.
usually it's only a half an hour meeting with the head of MTC, or can we do like 10:15, that way I can get here?
Yeah, anything that morning's fine.
Okay. Cause I don't have to worry about it even at 10:30, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can zoom in for free, so if you like.
I'm sure he would love that.
That's gonna happen.
It's 9 hours ahead, oh.
Yeah.
You'll still be awake, you might be drunk, but you'll be still awake.
You'll be here
Sorry.
in spirit. You'll
I
be
shouldn't
here
have
in
said that on
spirit.
camera. Oops.
You'll be here
Sorry.
in spirit.
And we'll, and this is a tentative event, right?
Yeah, in the
Yes.
event that,
Yeah.
okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all your work on this and sticking along till past lunch hours here. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, we are adjourned, sorry, Jessica, you can shut it off
Thank
now,
you.
before I say something else inappropriate.